Chapter 1096. Just like that, the bet was made. Yang Qindong also told them what he wanted them to do, which was to publicly announce that their assassination attempt on Yang Qindong was ordered by the great general Ashikaga Yoshimasa, and announce it to the entire Japanese Empire. Just this? Chuishiki asked in disbelief. Yes. Yang Qindong gave a very certain answer. Originally, the three of them came to assassinate Yang Qindong because of the great general's order, and they didn't feel that there was anything wrong with it. Furthermore, they were all enemies, so wasn't it normal for them to try to kill each other? They were just telling the truth, so it wasn't a big deal. Therefore, they would be able to get 5 million in funding for the development of the ninjas. No matter how they looked at it, it was a profit. Chuishiki and Yui Suzuki didn't have any reason to refuse, so they agreed immediately. Seeing the two of them agree so quickly, Yang Qindong couldn't help but smirk. He knew that he wasn't far from conquering this powerful ninja force, because he knew what kind of consequences would come after this matter was announced to the world. Ashikaga Yoshimasa wasn't just a simple martial artist, he was also a political strategist. Even if some things were true, they couldn't be publicly announced. On this point, Yang Qindong and Ashikaga Yoshimasa had the same idea. Chuishiki and Yui Suzuki, on the other hand, were too naive, and they would eventually take the initiative to become Yang Qindong's subordinates. The facts also proved that Yang Qindong's idea was correct. When Chushi and Yui Suzuki suddenly appeared in public and pointed out the fact that they were ordered by the great general to assassinate Emperor Wu Nan of the Ming Dynasty. Unfortunately, they didn't succeed. The Lu 4th Division and the Lu 7th Division, who had already arrived at Neon, cooperated with each other and launched an attack on the nearby Pinyin capital from the Sanyang Sex Bomo area. The 100mm mortars that had been prepared beforehand were fired like raindrops, and they instantly destroyed the first line of defense set up by the great general. The 30,000 Japanese army didn't even see the shadow of the 5-star army, and thousands of people were killed or injured, and then they hurriedly retreated. When the news reached Ashikaga Yoshimasa, who was still occupying the flat well field in the Hokuriku, he was furious. Seeing that the largest resistance force in the country was about to be annihilated, the sudden change in the situation in the south caught him off guard. According to the report of the scouts, the 5-star army's attack is very fierce, especially their artillery. How can he defend against an enemy that he can't even see? Under this situation, not only will the 50,000 Japanese Empire's garrison not be able to stop the 5-star army's attack, but the Japanese Empire's capital, Pinyin Beijing, will also be lost. And all of this was caused by the words of the ninja, which directly tore up the agreement between the two sides. At this moment, the great general hated the ninja to the core. At this time, the samurai captain Yamaguchi Fukada stood up and said that the ninja should be taught a lesson, and let others know what the consequences of betraying the great general are. Regarding this, Ashikaga Yoshimasa also nodded in agreement. He also needed a way to vent his anger, and Matsumoto Kazuma was undoubtedly the vent. That's why Yamaguchi Fukada appeared in the ninja compound with 200 elite samurai and Matsumoto Fuma. That's why the ninjas resisted and Matsumoto Fuma went all out. Yang Qindong had long expected that Ashikaga Yoshimasa wouldn't tolerate the betrayal of his subordinates, so he arranged for Tai Hu and Bai Zua, the two captains of Wolf Fang and Ghost Shadow, to sneak into Pinyin Beijing to rescue Matsumoto Kazuma. According to the information obtained from the intelligence department, Matsumoto Kazuma was different from the 3 special ninjas under the rock. This person had some tricks up his sleeve. If this kind of person was used well, it would naturally save a lot of effort. But if it wasn't used well, he would become a poisonous snake that could bite at any time. Then how to subdue Matsumoto Kazuma would require some brains, at least it wouldn't be as simple as dealing with the 3 special ninjas under the rock. This was the reason why Tai Hu and Bai Zua didn't immediately act when they saw the samurai make a move. These 2 captains weren't in a hurry because they had already received orders from the 6th young master. However, Suzuki and Hayashikaga couldn't do it. Seeing their commander Matsumoto Kazuma fighting with his life on the line and bleeding profusely, they couldn't bear it and kept begging Tai Hu and Hayashikaga. They even swore an oath to be loyal to Bugnam of Gojoseon for generations. Whether it was Suzuki or Hayashikaga, they didn't expect that they would lose the bet. The assassination was originally the Supreme General's order, and they were just executing it. In any case, they were already enemies, so it wasn't a big deal to tell the truth. They really didn't think that Ashikaga Yoshimasa would make a move on Matsumoto Kazuma because of this. Isn't this kind of internal strife destroying one's own strength and raising the prestige of others? But regardless of whether they could think it through or not, it really happened. Now they didn't have time to think too much, they just wanted to save Matsumoto Kazuma and save more ninjas. Matsumoto Kazuma was already an arrow at the end of its flight, and he was fighting with all his life's potential. Taihu and Baizuo naturally saw this scene clearly. After hearing Hei Ishikaga's words of loyalty, and thinking that they had completed the 6th young master's mission, they finally decided to stop watching and make a move. After all, they still have a mission to save Matsumoto Kazuma and more ninjas, otherwise if they die the meaning of their presence here will be a lot smaller. Sniper, aim at the target and prepare to shoot. Langya, prepare to engage the enemy in close combat, and at the same time prepare the medicine. The two captains prepared to shoot at the same time. In the courtyard, Matsumoto Kazuma was still desperately trying to stab with his sword, because the wound on his abdomen was bleeding a lot. He knew that he was going to die here today. Knowing that he was going to die, he wasn't so afraid, he just wanted to kill a few more people before he died, and it can be regarded as revenge for his brothers. Yamaguchi Fukada was watching from the side. He didn't choose to fight with Matsumoto Kazuma. In his view, a dying man is still likely to have great potential. What he needs to do is to wait for the other side to continue to consume his strength, and when he completely has no power to resist, he will kill him to show his strength. Yamaguchi Fukada didn't make a move, which created enough opportunity for Iron Tiger and the others to save Matsumoto Kazuma. In the mainland, more and more ninjas died, and when the situation was about to be settled, suddenly on the roof of the courtyard, several archers tilted their bodies and rolled down from the courtyard wall. The sudden scene made many people very puzzled. What made them even more puzzled was that in just a few breaths of time, close to 10 more master archers threw down the bows that they relied on for survival and laid flat on the roof. No matter how others called out to them, they didn't respond at all. This is clearly the symptom of a person dying. For a time, the other archers also felt that they were in danger. The snipers in the dark continued to shoot, but in front of the archers who were on guard, they were no longer as accurate as before. Everyone was a long-range fighter and they had a natural sense of danger. After several archers dodged the bullets, they finally found that the situation was not right. Not good, there are assassins in the dark and they are very likely to be using weapons similar to firearms. After the captain of the archers dodged a fatal shot, he saw a small hole in the place where he was originally standing, and immediately said with a nervous face, "I'd hide in a safe place." The captain of the team finally spoke, and more than 100 archers hurriedly dodged in all directions, each looking for a safe place. "We've been discovered, let's just rush in," Captain Baizuo said with some reluctance. But archers were archers, and that kind of perception of danger was innate. He didn't expect to be able to eliminate all of them. As long as they could scare them or even make them retreat, they would be able to save most of the ninjas. Under the protection of the Wolf Fang members, the snipers of the Ghost Shadow continued to approach the courtyard, and from time to time they would fire a shot. Most of them couldn't hit anyone, but the deterrent effect was still very effective. After the silencer was removed, when the gunshots began to sound from time to time, the archers began to retreat. The sudden appearance of the Ghost Shadow and Wolf Fang members also caught the samurai by surprise. The cunning Yamaguchi Fukada saw more and more mysterious people appear, and after taking the lives of several of his samurai from a distance, he knew that this was not a place to stay for long. Looking at Matsumoto Kazuma, who was still waving his sword and overdrawing his life, Yamaguchi Fukada finally didn't take the risk to make a move. In his eyes, Matsumoto Kazuma had lost so much blood, even if no one did anything to him, he was afraid that he wouldn't be able to hold on for long. So why take the risk? He immediately waved his hand and led the samurai to retreat, leaving this mess to Taihu and Baizuo who were rushing here. The samurai and the archers retreated very quickly, and the ninja courtyard quickly returned to its previous tranquility. The only difference was that this place was filled with the smell of blood. Even Taihu and Baizuo, who were accustomed to this kind of scene, couldn't help but sniffle when they arrived. "Okay, hurry up and clean up the battlefield and bring back those who are still breathing for treatment." In a very short time, Taihu adapted to the smell here, and then he began to issue orders. Less than 100 ninjas, including Matsumoto Kazuma, were either supported by their companions or directly on the prepared stretchers, and were moved out of the courtyard. The main force of the 5-star army was still on the way to Ping and Beijing, and they met Taihu and the others. Yang Qindong also had the opportunity to personally see Matsumoto Kazuma, who was lying on the stretcher with a pale face. Chapter 1097. As soon as they saw Yang Qindong, Chirishi and Yui Suzuki knelt on the ground. They had already heard from Tai Hu and Bai Zua that this kind of person who needed treatment due to excessive bleeding could only be treated by the sixth young master and his designated medical team. Although they didn't know what method would be used, they knew that it would cost a lot. The ninjas weren't completely accepted by the 5-star army yet, and they didn't know if the sixth young master would care about them or not. At this moment they could only kneel and beg for mercy, hoping that Bugnam of Gojoseon would help. Their request was naturally accepted. Since Yang Qindong was determined to subdue the ninjas for his own use, how could he watch something happen to Matsumoto Kazuma, a core member of the ninjas? Come, send him to the field hospital, tell them what I said, no matter the cost, they must save him. The first Longway's Captain Chiu V hurriedly nodded and led his men to take over the stretcher. Chuishi and Yui Suzuki were left behind. They looked at Yang Qindong with gratitude and knelt on the ground again. The person was sent away for treatment, but most of the ninjas didn't think that Matsumoto Kazuma could be saved. They saw with their own eyes how much blood was flowing out of his body, and how pale and ugly his complexion was. Under their old thinking, they believed that a person's blood was limited. Since so much had been lost, no matter what methods they used, they would not be able to reverse the situation. Didn't they hear Bugnam of Gojoseon say that they must do their best to save him? Didn't he say that he would definitely be cured? There were a lot of ninjas who thought this, and the number was not small. When Chuishi heard these words, he couldn't help but stare back angrily. You have to believe in Bugnam of Gojoseon, and you have to believe that Koen Matsumoto has the strongest will in the world. He will definitely be able to survive. Although he said this, in fact, Chuishi didn't believe that Matsumoto Kazuma would really be fine. He was just doing his best and leaving the rest to fate. For the whole afternoon, nearly 100 ninjas rested in several large tents arranged for them. They were all extremely quiet. This was related to the boring life they had since childhood, and they were also worried about Matsumoto Kazuma's health. For a long time, Matsumoto Kazuma was their leader. No matter what happened, everyone was used to listening to his orders. Now that there was a problem, it was no wonder that everyone was so sad. Some people didn't even know how to face the future. Time passed little by little, the sky gradually darkened, and finally there was movement outside the big tent. Ninjas' perception is very strong. As soon as they heard footsteps coming, they walked out of the big tent without anyone calling them. With the help of the torches next to the barracks, they saw that the person who came was a seemingly high-level guard who followed Bugnam of Gojoseon during the day. The person who came was tall and his voice was like thunder. After noticing that all the ninjas, even some of the wounded who were covered with gauze, involuntarily walked out of the big tent, he nodded with satisfaction. This saved him the trouble of notifying them one by one. Hello everyone, my name is Beta Persei. I am Bugnam of Gojoseon's personal guard. I am here on behalf of Bugnam of Gojoseon to inform you that Matsumoto Kazuma has passed the critical period and is fine. Where? Really? After a moment, the ninjas who reacted suddenly became lively. Many of them had a look of joy on their faces, and some of them showed a look of disbelief. For example, Bloishida was one of them. Beta Persei Koen, is Koen Matsumoto really okay? Yes. Beta Persei replied with a very positive tone. Then can we go and see him? Yui Suzuki asked anxiously. Yes, but after all, his body hasn't fully recovered, so we can't send too many people at once. You can send 2 representatives to see him first. Beta Persei also knew that if he didn't let people see him, not many people would believe him. The 2 representatives were naturally Bloishida and Suzuki Yu. They represented nearly 100 ninjas and followed Beta Persei to the temporary battlefield hospital. There they saw Matsumoto Kazuma lying on the bed. His face had recovered a lot of color, but he could only lie down. Koen Matsumoto. Bloishida and Suzuki Yu almost cried at the same time, and said with a somewhat choked voice, You're here. After seeing his 2 companions, Matsumoto Kazuma forced a smile, and then wanted to sit up on the bed, but he inadvertently pulled the wound on his abdomen that was just stitched, and he couldn't help but grin. All of this was seen by Bloishida and Suzuki Yu, and they quickly stepped forward to help him. Looking at all of this, Beta Persei knew that it was time for him to leave. He said that the visiting time can't be too long, and the patient still needs to rest. Then he left first. When only Matsumoto Kazuma and the other 2 were left in the tent, it suddenly became very quiet. The 3 of them closed their eyes and did the same thing. This wasn't praying but sensing. They were sensing the surrounding environment to decide if they could talk about something here. Soon, the 3 of them opened their eyes and nodded to each other. After ensuring that the environment was safe, Matsumoto Kazuma, who was lying on the bed, was the first to ask, Why am I here? Why are you here? Because of the lag in the news, Matsumoto Kazuma still didn't know that the three of them failed their mission and were captured by Yang Qindong, and were used as an excuse to deal with the Supreme Generalissimo. Right now, Matsumoto Kazuma's mind was still stuck in the scene where he fought with the samurai. Koen Matsumoto, the situation is like this. Blow Ishida, who was quite eloquent, told him how the three of them failed their mission and were captured, and how they reached an agreement with Yang Qindong. Finally, they went to the ninja compound with the elites of the 5-star army to rescue the three of them. Matsumoto Kazuma listened carefully at first, but when he heard that the three of them were captured, he was surprised. When he heard that he reached an agreement with Bugnam of Gojoseon, he was worried that they would be used. After hearing everything, he finally understood why the Supreme Generalissimo sent Yamaguchi Fukada to attack him with elite samurai and 200 sharpshooters. Matsumoto Kazuma was in charge of the external affairs of the ninja compound, so his understanding of the human heart was much better than Blow Ishida and Yui Suzuki. Yang Qindong's bet was a conspiracy in his eyes, and it was proven that all of this was beneficial to the development of the 5-star army. Obviously, Matsumoto Kazuma knew everything, but he couldn't say anything. Blame them? He didn't kill the captives, but he respected them and gave them a chance to choose. That was already very benevolent. At least from Matsumoto Kazuma's point of view, if he was in their shoes, he wouldn't let the person who tried to assassinate him live. Also, Yang Qindong only made a simple plan, and the one who really fell for it was the Supreme Generalissimo. If he didn't think of himself as a cautious person, if he trusted him a little more, this kind of fratricide wouldn't have happened. From this matter, it can be seen that everyone didn't trust each other. Under such a foundation, even if the fratricide didn't happen today, it might happen in the future. With a long sigh, Matsumoto Kazuma knew that he lost and lost completely. Now that the other party saved his life and gave him a new lease of life, he didn't seem to have any choice in the future. One was his old boss who wanted to kill him. The other was his new boss who not only saved his life, but also gave him a place to live and a new hope. What choice to make, he should know how to make a decision. But before that, he still hoped to know more about Bugnam of Gojoseon so that he can get more benefits for himself in the future. Blow Ishida, Suzuki Koen, you've all seen Bugnam of Gojoseon, tell me about your impression and understanding of him. In the main tent 2 miles away, Beta Persei stood in front of Yang Qindong and handed over the task. Then he asked with a puzzled look, "Young master, why don't you let me stay and listen to what they say? I'm sure I won't be discovered by them." "Oh, do you think that ninja's perception is just for show? I can guarantee that before you get close to the big tent, you will be discovered," Yang Qindong said with a smile. Ninjas are best at sneaky assassinations. The feeling that they can appear at any time is very annoying, making people unable to guard against them. The reason is their perception of the environment. It is precisely because of this instinct that they can avoid all kinds of warnings and appear next to the target without making a sound. Being looked down upon by the young master, Beta Persei was a little unconvinced. "Young master, so we just let them be? What if they don't abide by the rules and don't do it according to the bet and want to leave or assassinate you again?" "They won't." Yang Qindong's answer was firm. "In this world, I'm afraid that there are few people who know more about the ninja industry than him. It is precisely because they do what they say, because of this simplicity, that they can persist in training in a boring environment and thus become a terrifying existence. On the contrary, if they have other ideas in their hearts and there are too many conspiracy elements, then they won't have their current achievements." Because of this understanding, Yang Qindong believes that the date of his conversation with Matsumoto Kazuma is not far away. Early the next morning, as soon as Yang Qindong had breakfast, Captain Chiu V came to the main tent and reported to him that Matsumoto Kazuma wanted to meet. "Is it that urgent?" Yang Qindong smiled after listening, then said to Chiu V, "Let's go, accompany me to patrol inside and outside the barracks." Chapter 1098. Yang Qindong wanted to see Matsumoto Kazuma, but he couldn't be in a hurry. "I can't just go and see you when you want to see me. Wouldn't that be too tasteless?" He was now the great Ming prince. How high was his status? How could anyone see him just because they wanted to? Besides, at this time, the appropriate control will also play a positive role in conquering the ninja team, so why not? Yang Qindong was not in a hurry, but the one who was anxious was Matsumoto Kazuma. Seeing that it was already noon and he had even finished eating lunch, but he still didn't see Yang Qindong's figure. He became somewhat anxious. Originally, he was anxious to see Yang Qindong because he wanted to express his attitude. That was, he was willing to accept his loss. Even if he wasn't present when the bet was made, he was still willing to accept everything. But as compensation, he also had to put forward some conditions to fight for more benefits for the ninja team. Matsumoto Kazuma was very confident that Yang Qindong would agree to some of his conditions. This could be seen from the fact that the other party didn't kill the 3 ninjas under the rock. Instead, he arranged for elite forces. Now he even put in a lot of effort to save him. Since the other party valued him so much, if he didn't take the opportunity to put forward some conditions, wouldn't it be a waste of this opportunity? But after not seeing Yang Qindong's figure for a long time, his originally confident heart became somewhat uncertain. That is ninja really that important? At least for the leader of the 5-star army, the Ming Dynasty's Bugnam of Gojoseon, is it really that important? Until the afternoon passed, Matsumoto Kazuma's original confidence was worn down by more than half. When it was time to eat dinner, there was still no news. He even began to doubt his own importance. It was also at this time that dense footsteps came from outside the big tent. Then the curtain of the big tent opened from the outside. A tall figure took the lead to enter, bringing a lot of pressure to Matsumoto Kazuma. The first to enter was Beta Persei. He first looked around, then looked at Matsumoto Kazuma lying on the bed. After he didn't find anything unusual, he nodded with satisfaction. He turned around and respectfully said, "Young master, everything is normal." After his voice fell, Yang Qindong appeared in front of Matsumoto Kazuma with a confident smile. Although he has heard about him for a long time, this is the first time he saw King Wunan of Daemyang. Matsumoto Kazuma carefully observed the other party and found that the other party has a trace of a superior aura. The most important thing is that the confidence in his body seems to be able to infect others, giving people a sense of omnipotence. "Matsumoto, don't you know how to kneel when you see Bugnam of Gojoseon?" Beta Persei noticed that this person only stared at the young master at this moment and didn't do anything else. He suddenly shouted angrily, and this shout also pulled the other party's thoughts back to reality. "Matsumoto Kazuma greets Bugnam of Gojoseon." As he spoke, he wanted to get out of bed and salute. "Forget it, you still have injuries on your body, just sit and talk." Yang Qindong casually waved his arm, but it was this movement that seemed to have some kind of magical power, making Matsumoto Kazuma, who wanted to get up, stop and involuntarily say, "Thank you." "You don't have to thank me, I saved you because I don't want to see a talent fall. Also, this king's time is limited, I only have the time for an incense stick to burn to listen to you. I have other military affairs to attend to in a while." Yang Qindong sat down in front of the chair that Beta Persei had brought over. Chiovi behind him also took out an incense stick, lit it and stuck it in the ground, using facts to tell some people that they really only had the time for an incense stick to burn. Such anxiety and such an attitude. For a moment, Matsumoto Kazuma, who had a stomach full of words, suddenly didn't know what to say. He wanted to say too much, and it was far from being able to express clearly in an incense stick's time. Otherwise he wouldn't be able to play a very important role. If he can't explain his importance, then how can he make conditions? After waiting for a whole day, Matsumoto Kazuma really thought that Yang Qindong was very busy. If he missed today's negotiation, who knows when the next negotiation will be. He and his ninjas can't just wait like this. "I have to give in." The facts made Matsumoto Kazuma quickly make a decision. Since time is limited, he can only seize the time to make demands. In order to reach an agreement in a limited time, he has to constantly give in and give up benefits. Bugnam of Gojoseon, Chuashiki-kun and Suzuki-kun said that you are willing to support the development and growth of our ninja training team, right? With a hint of probing tone he said. Although this was originally a fact, he had seen many people who reneged on their debts, not to mention that if Yang Qindong admitted it, then it would be a large expenditure of 5 million silver coins. That's right. Matsumoto Kazuma still wanted to probe, but Yang Qindong had already openly admitted it. After getting an accurate answer, Matsumoto Kazuma was very happy in his heart. Once there is an injection of 5 million silver coins, it is equivalent to having a great financial power. Whether it is high-intensity training or recruiting suitable seedlings, it will not be a problem. But just as this smile hung on his face, Yang Qindong also opened his mouth and said, "The promised 5 million silver coins will not be given to you all at once. In the beginning I will give you 1 million silver coins, and then it will be paid in 5 batches within 3 years. During this period, if you complete the task given by this king, there will be additional rewards, but if the task is not completed well or if you are disobedient, then your silver coins will be deducted. Do you agree?" He didn't expect there to be such an additional condition, but Chuashiki-kun didn't say anything before. After being stunned for a moment, Matsumoto Kazuma felt relieved. Now he was at the chopping block and he was the meat on the chopping block. What should he do? Shouldn't it be up to him? At least he didn't deny the 5 million silver coins. This result already made him very satisfied. The time it takes for a stick of incense to burn quickly passed. Yang Qindong did as he said and got up to leave, leaving Matsumoto Kazuma alone on the bed. He was still thinking about what Yang Qindong had said. Arrange a suitable training ground, provide food and gold. Of course, the food will be converted into silver coins and deducted from the 5 million silver coins. In addition, when there is a task to be given, the ninja team must carry it out to the letter. If they succeed, there will be rewards, and if they fail, there will be punishment. All of this was different from what Matsumoto Kazuma had imagined. He wanted to fight for a year without missions to restore the ninja team's strength, but now it seems that he didn't have the opportunity to raise the conditions, and he didn't have the ability to do so. Fortunately, Yang Qindong did what he said. Before he left hundreds of banknotes which added up to exactly 1 million silver coins. Holding these in his hands, Matsumoto Kazuma felt a sense of security in his heart. Yang Qindong put aside the matter of the ninja team. He had done what he should do, and the next development would depend on the ability of the other party. Now his main energy was focused on conquering Ping and Beijing. He wanted to take advantage of the time when Ashikaga Yoshimasa was focusing on conquering the Northern Land Road. Ping and Beijing was not only a simple region, it was also the capital of the Japanese Empire, and the political and economic center of the country. Of course, at this time the Japanese Empire didn't have its own unique culture. Once this place was conquered, it would represent the orthodoxy in a way. In addition, Junko was the princess of the Japanese Empire. When the time came, there would be a lot of people responding to her call, and it would be much easier to deal with Ashikaga Yoshimasa. Ashikaga Yoshimasa, who was being thought of, did not look good. Standing in front of him was Yamaguchi Fukada, whose face was full of shame. This time he didn't complete the task well, and didn't bring back Matsumoto Kazuma's body. Afraid of being punished, he kept his head down after entering the room, and didn't dare to raise it again. Get out, 20 strokes of the cane. A cold voice came out of Ashikaga Yoshimasa's mouth. Yamaguchi Fukada breathed a sigh of relief in his heart and turned to receive his punishment without saying a word. He knew the general's temper. If things went wrong, it was normal for him to be beheaded. This time, 20 strokes of the cane was the lowest punishment. This was not because Ashikaga Yoshimasa had a good temper, but because he was in need of manpower, especially since the ninja team could no longer be used, and the samurai team was abandoned. The number of cards in his hand would only decrease. Yamaguchi Fukada had already rolled out, but Yoshimasa's face still didn't look too good. Originally he wanted to capture Matsumoto Fujina alive, or at least get his body, and then hand it over to the Pentastar army to get himself out of this matter. But now it seemed that this trump card was gone. He slowly raised his head and fell on the other person in the room. Nin Shijuan, without Matsumoto Kazuma, the negotiation won't be a big problem, right? Nin Shijuan was sitting in the room. When he learned that the five-star army suddenly tore up the agreement and invaded Ping and Beijing, he urgently summoned this person, and wanted to reopen the negotiation and stabilize the five-star army first. But who would have thought that the bargaining chip in his hand was gone, and all hope could only be placed on Nin Shijuan's silver tongue. Nin Shijuan, who was asked this question, frowned first. At this moment he was a little angry in his heart. He had spent a lot of effort to suppress the five-star army through negotiations. He had even paid the price of the entire Shanyang path for this. But now, everything was destroyed because of the general's actions. Since he was the one who destroyed the negotiation first, it was no wonder that the five-star army suddenly attacked. Under the current situation, it was very difficult to stop the five-star army. Ashikaga Yoshimasa did not immediately answer this question. He knew that Nin Shijuan had an idea, so he immediately said, Yamaguchi-kun just said that Matsumoto Kazuma lost too much blood, and I'm afraid that he is already dead. It shouldn't be too difficult to put all the blame on a dead person. Chapter 1099. Sigh. Ning Shidaxiu sighed in his heart. He knew that he couldn't avoid this anymore, so he finally said, if Matsumoto Kazuma is really dead, then this matter can be discussed, but we still have to pay a price. If there are no benefits, then I'm afraid that the five-star army won't be able to negotiate. They want benefits? Just give it to them. Ashikaga Yoshimasa became excited. Then he strode to the map on the side. After pondering for a moment, he pointed at the Shanin Road area and said, Give this area to the 5-star army. This kind of benefit should be able to stop their army from advancing. What? Give the entire Shanin Road to them? This time it was Ning Shidoxu's turn to be shocked. It must be known that in the entire Japanese Empire, there were only 7 districts other than Ping and Beijing. They already gave one to them before and the 5-star army took down another one. Now that they were giving another one, didn't that mean that they had already taken over half of the Japanese Empire's land? Looking at Ning Shidoxu's shocked expression, Ashikaga Yoshimasa smiled with satisfaction. This was the effect he wanted. Presumably, King Wunan of Daimyong would be as shocked as Ning Shidoxu was right now. Yes, give it to them. I'm generous, right? Ashikaga Yoshimasa laughed. He didn't care about Ning Shidoxu's shock at all. Very quickly he gave a reasonable explanation. Right now our main goal is to destroy the Flatwell field. As long as he dies, there will be no resistance in the country. At that time, it will be time for us to go back and deal with the 5-star army. Before that, we need peace. Besides, is the Shanin Road really that easy to take? There are dozens of big and small forces there. There are more than 200,000 soldiers there than the 5-star army. If they want to take it down, it won't be something that can be done overnight. Ningshi Duoshio finally understood what the great general meant. He let out a sigh of relief and nodded at the same time. He was really afraid that the great general was afraid of the 5-star army and wanted to give up all the benefits. Since he already had a plan, he only needed to execute it. With such a big dish like the Shanin path in front of him, he believed that no one would be able to resist the temptation. All right. Please rest assured, great general. Leave everything to me. 3 days later, Ningshi Duoshio arrived at the 5-star army's tent. This was the second time he came here, so he was very familiar with the place. When he saw Yang Qindong, he first saluted, then explained, and finally threw out the bait. Regarding the assassination, Ningshi Duoshio naturally said that all of this was the personal behavior of the ninjas. He and the great general didn't know about it, but in any case, this incident caused losses and shock to the Bugnam of Gojoseon. As compensation, and to show the friendly relationship between the two sides, Ningshi Duoshio expressed on behalf of the great general that he was willing to give up the Shanin Road to the 5-star army as compensation. Another large area of the Shanin Road was given to him just like that. Yang Qindong felt a little surprised. But then he understood that this wasn't giving him benefits, it was clearly setting a trap for him. Does he really think that he is a 3-year-old child who can be easily fooled? After Ningshi Duoshio finished speaking, he kept staring at Yang Qindong. He wanted to see what his first reaction would be to make the most correct judgment. In order not to let the other party down, Yang Qindong deliberately pretended to be very interested and greedy. There was even a hint of eagerness in his voice. Is the great general really willing to give the Shanin Road to the 5-star army? Of course, the great general values the friendship between the Bugnam of Gojoseon. Seeing that Yang Qindong seemed to have fallen into his trap, Ningshi Duoshio was happy in his heart, and at the same time he replied with a very positive tone. Well, thank you very much, great general, but I don't know if this matter can be announced to the world? This can also express the deep friendship between us and the great general. Yang Qindong smiled and made a small request. Since he was going to put on a show, of course he had to go all the way. Ningshi Duoshio thought that Yang Qindong had fallen into his trap, so he didn't suspect anything and simply agreed. He also said that he would send the document personally written by the great general to the 5-star army's barracks in 7 days at the latest. It was just a handwritten document, but it actually needed 7 days. Ningshi Duoshio's intention to use this opportunity to stall for time was obvious. But Yang Qindong didn't have the intention to expose him. He also needed time to make some preparations. Ningshi Duoshio left very satisfied. He didn't know that only half a day after he left, a small team walked out of the 5-star army. They left the barracks and went straight in the direction of the Shanin Road. The person leading the team was the director of the intelligence bureau in the Japanese Empire. Guanxing Guanxing was following Yang Qindong's orders. This time he was going to see the Japanese Empire's Shanin Road's General Uehara Toda. As the largest military force in the Shanin Road, Uehara Toda had 80,000 soldiers. Such a force could be considered an extremely powerful force even among the ranks of generals. Based on his understanding of the Shanin Road's terrain and environment, it wasn't an exaggeration to say that he was the local snake. Normally, Uehara Toda and the great general Ashikaga Yoshimasa didn't interfere with each other's business. When it came to some big matters, the two sides would cooperate to a limited extent. It was precisely because the great general didn't see him as an enemy that he had to deal with immediately that Uehara Toda's days were really carefree. No matter how the Japanese Empire Civil War was, even if Baiming and Bugnam of Gojoseon wanted to get a share of the pie, he still wasn't worried at all. He just sat there and watched the situation change as if he had nothing to do with it. In a war, very few people could really stay out of it. Uehara Toda also knew that he had to make a move, but when to choose the right time and how to do it to maximize the benefits, this was what he was looking for. To sum it up, he was waiting for the right price. Sure enough, Uehara Toda, who hadn't made a move until now, would receive all kinds of gifts from the great general from time to time. Gold, silver, treasures, beautiful women, and at the same time, it was also to appease him, hoping that he wouldn't use this opportunity to cause trouble. He fully understood Ashikaga Yoshimasa's intentions. This Uehara Toda really did things according to the rules. The civil war had been going on for almost half a year, but he hadn't sent a single soldier to the battlefield. He was very good at being a spectator, watching the situation unfold. On this day, Uehara Toda, who was drinking and enjoying a rare peaceful time in his great general's residence, welcomed a special guest, the five-star army's messenger Guanxing. Regarding the five-star army, Uehara Toda's feelings were very conflicted. The reason he was able to obtain all kinds of benefits from the current chaotic situation was because of the five-star army's sudden intervention. From this point of view, he should thank them. But on the other hand, the five-star army was still an outsider, and no matter how the Japanese Empire fought, it was still meat in the pot. As a great general of the Japanese Empire, of course, he didn't want to see other people come to his country and take advantage of it. With this kind of love and hate, Uehara Toda hesitated for a moment. Thinking about how powerful the five-star army was, especially their firearms, he finally decided to meet the other party. If the other party really had a request, as long as it wasn't too excessive, he wouldn't mind agreeing. It was better than provoking a powerful opponent for no reason. In the main hall, Uehara Toda received Guanxing. As soon as they met, he had a smile on his face and showed a very warm appearance. While inviting Guanxing to sit down, he also personally poured a cup of sake for him. This kind of reception, if it was someone else, would really be moved. In Guanxing's eyes, his evaluation of Uehara Toda had to be a bit higher. A man who knew when to bow and submit wasn't afraid of villains, but he was afraid of hypocrites. This person will probably be a stumbling block on the path of the five-star army in the future. Guanxing, who made a preliminary impression in his heart, smiled and took the sake. His mouth was full of thanks, and the guest and the host gave a very harmonious feeling for a while. After drinking several cups of sake, the relationship between the two sides seemed to be a lot closer, and Guanxing finally talked about business. And when he opened his mouth, he exploded with a bomb. Uehara Toda, do you know that a disaster is about to befall you? Uehara Toda, who was also observing Guanxing and guessing the purpose of the other party's visit, heard this and his face froze. But soon he chuckled and said, "Esteemed envoy, aren't you being a little alarmist? How could there be an imminent disaster?" What? Doesn't the general know? Guanxing, who had already thought of all kinds of possible responses, pretended to be surprised and asked with a confident look. Know what? Uehara Toda, who was completely driven by the rhythm, had to ask aloud. It seems that the general really doesn't know. Seeing that we are chatting so well, then I will tell the general. It won't be long before the Yamen Road will be owned by the five-star army. At that time, I am afraid that the general will lose everything he has. As if he was stating a fact, Guanxing shook his head as he spoke. Uehara Toda's face was a bit unfriendly, and he stared at Guanxing and said, "What? Does the five-star army want to send troops to occupy the Yamen Road?" Occupy? What do you mean by that? Guanxing asked with a puzzled expression. What? Didn't you say that this place will soon be owned by the five-star army? Then what are you doing if you don't want to occupy it? If that's the case and you're here to declare war, then I'll accept it. However, the 80,000 troops under my command and the hundreds of thousands of people from other forces are not to be trifled with. The Shanin Road belongs to us Neon people, and no one else is allowed to touch it. When he said the last sentence, Uehara Toda showed a domineering side, as if he was not afraid of war, nor was he afraid of the five-star army. Uehara Toda's fearless performance was seen by Guanxing. This was the result he had expected, so he exclaimed, "What does the general mean? The five-star army never meant to be the general's enemy. All of this is because the great general Ashikaga Yoshimasa promised our Bugnam of Gojoseon." Chapter 1100. Uehara Toda, who was about to continue to fight head-on and show his strong side to make the five-star army fear him, suddenly heard Guan Xing's words. He was stunned for a moment, then he said with a confused expression, "Wait, what did you say just now? You said that everything was the Grand General's idea?" "Yes. It's like this." Guan Xing felt that the time was right, so he told Uehara Toda all the promises that Ninjashi Toda made after meeting Bugnam of Gojoseon. In the end, he said, "In a few days the Grand General's handwritten document will be sent to Bugnam of Gojoseon. When the time comes, the Grand General will be able to see whether it's real or not. By the way, the Grand General's handwriting, I'm sure the Grand General can recognize it." These days the two sides have been communicating a lot, and Uehara Toda certainly recognized Ashikaga Yoshimasa's handwriting. However, he did not care about these details. He was thinking about why the Grand General would betray him. Could it be that the Grand General wanted to sit on top of the mountain and watch the tigers fight like him? Uehara Toda's mind was in a mess. After Ninjashi Toda returned to the Hokuriku Road and met with Ashikaga Yoshimasa, she told him about her meeting with Yang Qindong. "Grand General, as you expected, Bugnam of Gojoseon was very tempted. This pie is really big. Ha ha ha." At this moment, Ashikaga Yoshimasa was in a very good mood. He laughed and said, "There are no eternal enemies and there are no eternal friends. Only interests are eternal. As long as Bugnam of Gojoseon is still a person, it's impossible for him not to be tempted. This is all within my expectations. Yes, the Grand General is mighty." Ninjashi Toda took the opportunity to flatter him. Good. You've done a good job. I'll reward you handsomely. However, there's one more thing I need you to do." Ashikaga Yoshimasa stopped laughing and spoke in a serious tone. "Please tell me, Grand General." Ninjashi Toda said with admiration. Ashikaga Yoshimasa said, "I'll write a letter. You can send it to the five-star army's camp. At the same time, I'll also write a letter to Uehara Toda. I'll have to trouble you to make the trip personally." Ashikaga Yoshimasa was able to become the most powerful official in the Japanese Empire. He was even able to control the royal family. He was not only good at war, he was also good at scheming. Since the five-star army had been ignited, the next step was to add fuel to the fire of the Japanese army in the Shanin Road. He didn't want the five-star army to progress too smoothly. What he wanted to see was a scene where the two sides were entangled and mutually damaged. If he pointed the five-star army's forces at the Shanin area and reminded Uehara Toda to be prepared, there was a high possibility that the five-star army would be entangled in a battle. Once he dealt with the Flatwell Field, which was the biggest opposition to him, it would be time for him to turn around and work with Uehara Toda to deal with the five-star army. To deal with foreign aggression, he must first deal with internal problems. This was also Ashikaga Yoshimasa's idea. As long as he destroyed the Flatwell Field and drove away the five-star army, it would be time for him to deal with Uehara Toda and the others. At that time he would become the emperor of the Japanese Empire. Everyone knew how to calculate, but it was obvious that Ashikaga Yoshimasa was not as good as Yang Qindong. His self-proclaimed masterpiece had long been seen through by others. Waiting for the letter that promised to give the Shanin area to the five-star army, Yang Qindong arranged for Longwei's second captain, Dao Xiao, to lead a group of elites to the north. Inside the shogun's mansion, Nishitoshi also brought the second letter from the shogun and met the owner of the mansion, Uehara Toda. He was still very enthusiastic as he received Ningshi Duishio's group. Although he had Guan Hang's reminder, Uehara Toda did not intend to reject the guests before everything was clear. He wanted to stay out of it. As for how the five-star army and the shogun would fight, let them do as they pleased as long as they did not drag him into it. Nishitoshi did not know that the messenger of the five-star army had already rushed over, and did not know that Uehara Toda already knew everything. He even took out the general's handwritten letter as if they were idiots. Then, with a face full of hatred, he talked about how domineering the five-star army was. He also said that the general was focusing all his efforts on dealing with Hirai Ida, so he really didn't have the energy to stop the five-star army. However, his heart was on General Uehara's side, and as long as they held off the five-star army for a while, the general would return and help him deal with the five-star army once he finished his work. If he did not hear Guan Hang's words, these words would be very believable. But after knowing everything, Uehara Toda would not be so easily fooled. The five-star army is indeed very overbearing. I am willing to listen to the shogun's orders and stall them here. But what? Seeing that they had succeeded, Nishitoshi asked in a very good mood. But before the army moves, the supplies have to go first. You have to give me some time to prepare. Uehara Toda purposely showed the look of a businessman. He was trying to bargain and gain some benefits for himself. Nishitoshi thought that he had seen through everything. As an opponent who would become his opponent sooner or later, he could not give him any benefits. He believed that once the 5-star army really came, Uehara Toda would know what to do without him giving anything. So he did not make any promises, and instead acted as if he did not understand, saying that he would give Uehara Toda a few days to prepare before the battle. Nishitoshi was sent to the inn to rest, leaving Uehara Toda with a face full of anger. The other party did not even want to give him any money. Was he really going to commit suicide? At this moment he was already leaning towards Guanhang's words. A day later, Dao Xiao came. Along with him was the document that Ashikaga Yoshimasa had taken the initiative to assign Shanin Road to the 5-star army. Guanhang was very happy when he saw this document. Haha, with this, Uehara Toda will not know what to do. How about this, I will go see him tomorrow morning. Captain Dao, you have been busy for a long time, so you should rest first. No need, we still have a mission. Where is Nishitoshi staying? Dao Xiao said very energetically, without the slightest bit of fatigue from the long journey. Damon Inn. Where Nishitoshi stayed. To be exact, this was Uehara Toda's property. Whenever a friend came, he would arrange for them to stay here. In Uehara Toda's territory, and in his inn, Nishitoshi never thought that he would be in any danger here. But when a short knife was placed in front of his neck, he woke up from his dream. He instinctively thought that Uehara Toda wanted to deal with him, so he immediately begged for mercy in Japanese. He also said that he had a lot of money, and as long as he could spare his life, he was willing to take it all out. If it was a normal person who was looking for money, he might have a chance when faced with these words. Unfortunately, he was facing Dao Xiao, so everything was a different story. As the second captain of Long Wei, Dao Xiao estimated that Qiuyang Qindong's people were treated well, and many people could only look up to him. Yang Qindong used people based on their ability, and at the same time he valued loyalty even more. If a person's character was not good, then no matter how capable they were, they would not enter his eyes. In terms of using people, Yang Qindong was very clear that words alone were not enough to have an absolute effect. They also needed to have a guarantee of living conditions. Therefore, every Longwei person's monthly salary was high enough to support a family of 50 people. In his own words, if you want people to work for you, how can you be stingy when it comes to money? This was also why people with ability were sharpening their brains to enter Longwei. Not only did it give them face, but it also gave them money. Dao Xiao was one of the people who enjoyed this kind of treatment, and he could be considered one of the people who benefited. Hearing Nishitoshi's words, he who had learned some Japanese said impatiently, "Shut up or I'll kill you right now." I'll shut up. Nishitoshi did not dare to speak. He could feel that the black-clothed man in front of him was full of murderous intent. What he said was not to scare him, but he really did not know how many people he had killed to give others such a feeling. The world quieted down and Dao Xiao finally continued with his work. To tell you the truth, as long as you listen to me, I won't kill you. Now write a letter and copy the content. He took out a letter and threw it in front of Nishitoshi, who was kneeling on the ground. Hearing that he could not die, Nishitoshi's head nodded like a chicken eating food. Then he took out the letter and after reading it, his face turned ugly. The content of the letter was not complicated. In his tone, he said that Uehara Toda had reached an agreement with the 5-star army, and that they were ready to attack the great general together. After reading the content, Nishitoshi was sure that the black-clothed man in front of him was not an ordinary bandit. He was not here for money but for a purpose. Slowly raising his head, Nishitoshi wanted to ask about the identity of the black-clothed man, but before he could open his mouth, pain spread through his whole body. Then blood flowed down his neck, and a fleshy ear appeared in Dao Xiao's hand. Pa! A broken ear was thrown in front of Nishitoshi, who wanted to scream but did not dare. He finally saw Dao Xiao's ruthless side, and he knew that everything just now was not a joke. He immediately lowered his head and looked for a pen and paper. Ningxi Duoxiu was very cooperative. In order to survive, he carefully read the letter after copying it. After making sure that there were no mistakes, he presented the letter to Dao Xiao with both hands with a flattering look on his face, as if he was trying to suck up to Dao Xiao. Logically speaking, he was also a talent. He had a glib tongue and could speak directly to people's hearts, which was why he was used by Ashikaga Yoshimasa. However, he was only good at talking. Although he had practiced martial arts before, it was not worth mentioning in front of Dao Xiao. It was not an exaggeration to describe it as a scholar meeting a soldier. Chapter 1101. Everyone only had one life, and Nishi Toshio didn't dare to gamble, nor did he dare to play any tricks. All he could do was to cooperate and gamble on the hope of survival. Obviously he lost the gamble. Dao Zhao's mission was to force Nishi Toshio to write the letter and then kill him. This was an order from Yang Qindong himself, and all he had to do was to carry it out 100%. After receiving the letter and verifying that there was no mistake, he thrust the dagger forward and stabbed it into the heart made of flesh and blood. Ningshi Duoshio was dead. Nishi Toshio was dead. The body was found the next morning by a subordinate who came to deliver food to the room. The matter was quickly reported to Uehara Toda in the general's residence. But at this moment, General Uehara was meeting with Guan Xing, and the letter in his hand was written by the Supreme General Ashikaga Yoshimasa himself. It said that he took the initiative to give the Hokuriku to the 5-star army. After confirming that it was written by Ashikaga Yoshimasa himself, Uehara Toda couldn't help but curse angrily, "Bastard." This was equivalent to him being betrayed and becoming a part of the transaction. He always thought that he was someone important, but now it seemed that the Supreme General didn't even care about the 80,000 soldiers under his command. It could be imagined that once the 5-star army was gone, the Supreme General would turn around and lead the army to destroy him. There was some heartache. The feeling of not being valued greatly hit Uehara Toda's self-confidence, and it also inspired him to have a greater idea of success. Guan Xing, who was sitting across from him, spoke at the right time. "General Uehara, don't be too angry. In the end, people still need to rely on their strength to speak. If you don't have strength, you'll only harm yourself." "What? Do you want to laugh at this, General?" Uehara Toda, who was in a bad mood, said coldly, and there was even a trace of murderous aura around him. "So what if you're the messenger of the 5-star army? This is the Hokuriku, my headquarters. No one can act tough in front of me." The murderous aura was faintly discernible, but Guan Xing didn't seem to feel it. He still chuckled and said, "General, you misunderstand. Since I'm here, of course I won't harm you. On the contrary, I'm here to give you a gift." "Gift? What gift?" Uehara Toda's face had a trace of confusion, and looking closely, there was a trace of vigilance. There had to be something fishy going on. He didn't believe that the 5-star army, who had no relation to him, would give him such a big gift. There might be some kind of trap. Guan Xing's next words made him realize that he had been overthinking things. The 5-star army was indeed going to give him a big gift, but he had to fight for it himself. Because according to Guan Xing, his so-called gift was only a way for him to move forward. "General, our Bugnam of Gojoseon said that he doesn't want to get involved in your internal strife. If it wasn't for the fact that Princess Junko has become the 8th madam, our 5-star army wouldn't even want to get involved in your Japanese Empire's affairs. All of this is just to give the princess an explanation. Next, they just need to go to Ping and Beijing and take back the palace. The 5-star army's goal will be achieved and they will stop. And unless someone provokes them, they will turn a blind eye to the internal strife of the Japanese Empire." As soon as Guan Xing's words fell, Uehara Toda chuckled. "Emissary, you clearly want to watch us fight among ourselves so that we can disintegrate without a single soldier." "General, you're wrong. What I said just now can be announced to the world in the form of a document. To be honest, if you really want to do something to the general, the 80,000 soldiers in your hands may not be enough." Guan Xing's tone also became a lot more serious. "Negotiations are like this. It's not advisable to blindly use force or soft tactics. Only by using both can you achieve your goal." Being looked down upon again, Uehara Toda's temper rose. He stared fiercely at Guan Xing, and it looked like he would ask someone to kill the person in front of him at any time. But before he could speak, footsteps came from outside the room. A guard walked in without permission with an anxious look on his face. Originally, Uehara Toda wanted to scold his subordinate for not following the rules, but when he saw the anxious look on his face, Uehara Toda knew something was wrong and asked, "What happened?" "General, things are not good." The guard walked forward and told Uehara Toda about Nioi Taksiyu's death in his room. When Uehara Toda received the news, his expression changed again and again. Suddenly he looked fiercely at Guan Xing and said, "Nioi Taksiyu is dead. Did you send someone to do it?" "This is really bad news, but I really didn't send someone to do it." Guan Xing looked surprised, then spread his hands and didn't admit it. Originally he didn't give the order, everything was Yang Qindong's idea. Seeing that Guan Xing still didn't want to get involved at this time, Uehara Toda said angrily, "What? Do you really think that I won't dare to kill you if you don't admit it? Let me tell you, this is not the barracks of the 5-star army, this is my general's mansion." Hee, of course I know that this is the general's mansion and I know that the general can kill me with a casual order, but will you really do this? Naoitaxiu is dead, and the general's side has become your enemy. Something happens to me now, the 5-star army will come. I really want to ask General Uehara, are your 80,000 soldiers really made of iron? Guan Xing wasn't a pushover. Since things had already come to this point, he had no way out, so he might as well tell the serious consequences. Guan Xing went all out and showed his trump card as if he wasn't afraid of death. This time, it was Uehara Toda's turn to be stunned. Originally, he wanted to take advantage of both sides, even if he saw the general's handwritten letter, so what? He never expected that the other party would treat him sincerely. The two sides could only use each other. Being used by the other party at least meant that he was valuable. As long as he handled it well, he might be able to get benefits from it and continue to watch the tigers fight on the mountain. But now Naoitaxiu was dead and he died in his own territory. Once the general knew about this, would he forgive him? As for Guan Xing, although his current behavior was very infuriating, as long as he still had a bit of intelligence, he wouldn't touch this person. What kind of joke was this? If he really killed Guan Xing, it would be the same as igniting a fire on himself. At that time, it was very likely that the general and the 5-star army would join forces to destroy him first. Don't think that there wasn't such a possibility. In the face of huge benefits, anything was possible. If you didn't dare to think about it, it would only prove that you were stupid, and you would be eliminated. Forcing himself to calm down, Uehara Toda looked at Guan Xing with a bit of admiration in his eyes. Honorable envoy, if I lead the army to attack Ashikaga Yoshimasa now, what kind of help can you give me? At this time, Guan Xing seemed to have changed into a different person. He was no longer as impulsive as before. His face regained a smile and said, "The 5-star army will send troops with you, General. We will send troops to Ping and Beijing and take it down. At the same time, I can assure you that unless there is an army in Shanin Road that provokes the 5-star army, we will definitely not send troops there. There will only be one master here, and that is you, General Uehara." Whether it was a promise or a guarantee, at least the words were comfortable to listen to. Uehara Toda also knew that it was very difficult for the 5-star army to make such a promise in such a situation. Because now he had no other choice. Other than finding a way to defeat Ashikaga Yoshimasa, he could only stay in place and wait for the other party to take the initiative to attack him. When that time came, he was afraid that he wouldn't even have the slightest chance of winning. Sooner or later they would have to fight, so it was better to strike first and gain the upper hand. While the flat well field was still fighting with the great general in Vietnam, he could take the initiative to send troops, and he could have one more ally which would increase his chances of winning. Okay, I hope the honorable envoy will remember your promise. I need you to write what you just said into a document, and then announce it to the world. Uehara Toda stood up. At this time he was ready to send troops. No problem, then I wish you, General Uehara, to win every battle and be invincible, ha. Guan Xing also stood up. He knew that this time, he had completed the task given to him by the 6th young master. He had made a great contribution. Haha, thank you for your kind words. Uehara Toda also laughed. He couldn't wait to see how powerful the great general's army was, and what kind of sparks would be created when the two sides collided on the battlefield. Since he had decided to send troops, of course, he couldn't have any hesitation. It was a taboo for a general to be indecisive. In just 3 days, 20,000 vanguard troops set off from the Shanin Road, along the edge of Ping and Beijing to the Hokuriku Road, and rushed behind the great general. When the news reached the 5-star army's camp, Yang Qindong patted the desk and shouted, and then said to Beta Persei beside him, "Give the order, everything will be done according to the plan." "Yes, young master." Beta Persei was also very excited and turned around to make the arrangements. Orders were sent out from the radio and spread to all directions. The armies, which had long been prepared for battle, were like dark clouds covering the moon, pressing towards the Japanese Empire's Kyoto, Ping and Beijing. In the Hokuriku Roads, Vietnam. After several fierce battles, Ashikaga Yoshimasa won another battle with the help of his troops that were several times more numerous than the other side, and finally occupied this area. According to the news, Flat Well Field only retreated to Ekigo Prefecture with 20,000 people. The great general who occupied Ekigo and Ekigo prefectures in succession, was full of righteousness. The powerful strength he showed also deterred some small warlords and small forces who wanted to take advantage of the opportunity to send troops to take advantage of him. As long as he occupied Ekigo prefecture, even if he didn't capture Flat Well Field alive, the situation would be settled. At that time he could spare some time to deal with the five-star army. He wanted to let everyone see that in the Japanese Empire, he, the great general, was the most capable person, and this place would eventually belong to him. Chapter 1102. Ashikaga Yoshimasa hadn't even fully digested the news of victory when a letter personally written by Ninji Toshihida appeared in front of him. Then his face turned from green to red to white, and finally became as black as charcoal. Uehara Toshiru of the mountain and village actually joined forces with the five-star army, and it looked like they were going to attack him. This person only had 80,000 troops. Did he eat a bear's heart and leopard's guts? With only 80,000 people, he dared to attack his 500,000 troops? General Maori regularization was in the big tent at the moment, waiting for the Supreme General's orders, and was lucky enough to see this letter. He also said with a puzzled face, "Supreme General, could Nishi Toshiru have been deceived?" Ashikaga Yoshimasa understood the meaning of Maori regularization's words and asked, "Are you saying that this news is false?" It's not that I doubt Nishi Toshiru's news, but it really doesn't make sense. Who is Uehara Toshiru? He's famous for being slippery. How could he make an enemy out of the great general for no reason? Mao Li-Zheng said seriously as if he was discussing the matter. But only he knew in his heart that he didn't like Nishi Toshiru. The two of them were the Supreme General's right-hand men, and it was common for them to secretly fight. If there was a chance, of course, he wouldn't mind stepping on them. It makes sense. Ashikaga Yoshimasa, who also didn't understand, nodded lightly and said, "In this case, arrange people to go to the mountain and village again to see Nishi Toshiru and see what's going on." Because of confidence, Ashikaga Yoshimasa never put Uehara Toshiru in his eyes, and he didn't think that he would take the initiative to attack him, so he didn't make any defensive preparations. Everything didn't change until 3 days later. In the main tent, Ashikaga Yoshimasa summoned his generals and daimyos, and was discussing how to send troops to Echigo Prefecture and how to kill Flatwell Field. Suddenly, a scout came into the tent with a panicked face. He knelt on the ground with an ugly face and handed over a letter in his hand. When the scout rushed into the tent, Ashikaga Yoshimasa felt that something was wrong. When he took the letter and read it, he only felt that his vision turned black. He forced himself to stand up and slammed the desk in front of him and said, "Baka! Uehara Toshiru, 5-star army, damn it!" This roar also startled the other generals. Maori regularization was the first to react, took the letter on the desk and read it, then his face turned ugly and said, clenching his fists and said, "Supreme General, didn't you say that Matsumoto Kazuma is dead? How could he stand up and accuse us?" Throwing Maori regularization a supercilious look, Ashikaga Yoshimasa didn't know what was going on. It was just that the matter had already happened, and it was no longer the time to worry about this problem. The most important thing was how to deal with the current complicated situation. The letter had already said that the 5-star army was attacking Ping and Beijing, and they used powerful firearms. The city couldn't hold on any longer. Also, Uehara Toshiru had sent troops along the edge of Ping and Beijing to Echigo Prefecture. Fortunately, when he received Nishi Toshiru's letter, he sent someone to remind the troops guarding there, so when they were attacked they didn't have the power to fight back. But after all, they didn't make a sufficient plan, so they might be able to hold on for a while, but it became a fact that they couldn't hold on. Ashikaga Yoshimasa didn't expect that the situation that seemed to be favorable to him would suddenly change so much. His face became quite ugly. After a while, he forcibly suppressed his anger and began to analyze the situation rationally. "I'm afraid that Ping and Beijing won't be able to hold on. Since that's the case, immediately arrange for Fukada Tani to stay there, and let him save his strength and retreat first. As for Uehara Toshiru, I'll leave it to General Maori. I'll give you 100,000 troops. Do you have the confidence to defeat him?" Ashikaga Yoshimasa didn't give up and continued to move forward. He wanted to capture Echigo Prefecture and completely defeat the Flatwell Field. In his eyes, the other forces in the country were nothing to be afraid of. Only this person was proficient in both the pen and the sword. If he didn't get rid of him, he would be a big problem in his heart. "Yes, General, please rest assured this subordinate will definitely complete the task." Leading an army of 100,000 troops, Maori regularization's eyes were full of excitement and excitement. Good, the other plans remain unchanged. The main force of the army will continue to move to Echigo Prefecture. The others will do what they should do. In short, this is the Japanese Empire, we won't lose. At the end of the meeting, Ashikaga Yoshimasa didn't forget to cheer everyone up. At this time, his eyes also showed a sense of determination, but also a sense of resentment. This time he was schemed against by the 5-star army and Uehara Toshiru. He will remember this hatred and one day he will get his revenge. Ping and Beijing outskirts. At this moment, it has all become the territory of the 5-star army. When Yang Qindong's order was issued, the 4th Division and the 7th Army, who had been waiting here for a long time, launched a fierce attack on the Japanese army outside Ping and Beijing with 100mm mortars. The cannonballs that fell from the sky caught the Neon troops who were guarding their off-guard. Fukada Tani, who was in charge of the defense of Ping and Beijing, felt great pressure in the situation where he couldn't even see where the enemy was. After half an hour of continuous artillery fire, they basically destroyed the anti-cavalry weapons, and even the formation of the army was in chaos. The soldiers didn't know their generals and the generals didn't know their soldiers. At this time, there was a huge tremor on the ground, and the cavalry of the 5-star army began to attack. With the 1st Cavalry Division in the lead and the cavalry of the new 3 armies as support, there were more than 40,000 people in total. Looking from afar, it was as if a black tornado was rushing over, pressuring toward them. This horrifying scene in the eyes of Daimyo Fukadaya, he could not help but tremble all over. He had long heard that the cavalry of the 5-star army was very powerful, and that they could compete with the people on horseback, the descendants of the Mongolians and the grassland cavalry, or even more powerful. For this reason, Fukada Teni not only prepared a lot of anti-cavalry stakes, but also enough bows and arrows. He wanted to give this cavalry a head-on attack and let them know how powerful he was. But now, when he really faced the cavalry of the 5-star army, he knew that the rumors were true. Just the momentum of this attack made people feel powerless. Not to mention that all of his preparations were already destroyed by the artillery fire. Block, block. Fukada Tani's heart was filled with fear, but his mouth was very tough. He called out the names of a few of his subordinates, and ordered them to block the cavalry of the 5-star army, while he himself led the main force to retreat to Ping and Beijing. He wanted to defend the high city, and these soldiers were left behind to buy time for his army to retreat. Charge. Go. On the sturdy warhorse, Tian, who held his sword in one hand, and with the other hand he constantly made all kinds of hand gestures to command the cavalry to advance. With him as the leader, the arrow point formation was the first to meet the enemy, and then like a drill they drilled into the enemy camp. As soon as they entered the enemy camp, Tian, who held his sword with both hands, and relying on his body's balance technique, he was as natural as sitting on a brick bed in his own house. Under his steady body, the 2 swords continuously slashed forward and to the side. The soldiers of the Japanese Empire were like scarecrows in training. In a short period of time he had advanced more than 100 meters and unexpectedly, no one was his match and no one was able to block his charge. Like Tian Hu, the other commanders and the arrow point formation of the arrow point formation were also doing the same thing. Wherever they went, no one was their match. Some of them were only wailing like ghosts and howling like wolves, some of them were only severed limbs, and some of them were only covered by the enemy's head and fled. For commanders, a total of 8,000 soldiers of the Japanese Empire were quickly penetrated. In addition to a large amount of blood on the ground, there were densely packed soldiers kneeling on the ground and begging to surrender. They were frightened by the powerful combat power of the 5-star army cavalry, and when they discovered that those who resisted were quickly decapitated, their fighting spirit began to collapse. More and more soldiers put down their dignity and knelt on the ground, becoming prisoners of war who had no dignity on the battlefield but could live on. Continue to charge. The 6th young master has ordered us to quickly take Ping and Beijing, and we can't give the enemy any time to breathe. Major General Tian, who rode on his horse. After penetrating the enemy's defense system, he spurred his horse forward and continued to lead the cavalry towards the capital of Ping and Beijing. Ping and Beijing was the capital of the Japanese Empire. Although it was far less majestic than some of the cities in the Great Ming Dynasty because of its conditions, it still had its own unique characteristics. This place was about to become his territory. If possible, Yang Qindong didn't want to destroy it too much. That was why he gave the order to the cavalry before the attack. It would be best if they could storm into the city with lightning speed, but if they couldn't, they were to retreat first and leave everything to the 4th Division and the 7th Army's 2 firearms divisions. Yang Qindong had given him hope, so Tian, who naturally had to follow the best goal. Before the battle had even begun, he had already called over the 5 captains under him and expressed his stance. We are the 1st Cavalry Division, the most powerful existence in the 5-star army. Now is the time to prove ourselves. Do you all have the confidence to complete the mission? Yes. The 5 commanders all stood in the most standard military posture and replied. This was the reason why they were in front of them. They were completely unsatisfied with defeating the Japanese army and occupying the periphery of Ping and Beijing. Their goal was to storm into the city and make a great contribution. In the rear, Ling Daqiang, the commander of the 4th Division, and Tian Su, the commander of the 7th Army, used binoculars to watch the 1st Cavalry Division continuously advance forward. When they put down the binoculars, the 2 commanders rubbed their eyes and revealed an incredulous expression. At this moment, their inner thoughts were extremely unified. The 1st Cavalry Division was the 1st Division, and they were worthy of this name. They were like madmen on the battlefield, invincible. They actually did as the 6th young master said and were about to storm into Ping and Beijing without the support of their artillery. Chapter 1103. The time to sigh was very short. The changes on the battlefield were often abnormal, so it was impossible to give the commander more time to think. All soldiers listen to my order. Run and keep up. Charge into Ping and Beijing and occupy the capital of Hainan. Charge into Ping and Beijing and occupy the capital of Hainan. The 2 division commanders couldn't let Tianhu take all the credit. They also wanted a share of the pie. Thus they broke their original plan of waiting and watching. They began to speed up and run forward. The new army commander Su He also had the same idea. He was once a general of the Tatar tribe, and had competed with Tianhu for the position of commander of the 1st Cavalry Division. Seeing that his brother's cavalry didn't stay on the battlefield and continued to charge forward, he gritted his teeth and said, 4th Cavalry Division, stay behind and clean up the battlefield. The other 3 divisions follow me and charge forward. Charge. The original plan of fighting steadily was completely changed. Under the leadership of Major General Tianhu, tens of thousands of 5-star army soldiers gave up on the steady rhythm and changed to charging forward. It seemed like they wouldn't stop until they entered Ping and Beijing. This made Fukada Tani, who was leading his troops to retreat, suffer. After running for a while, he arrived at Ping and Beijing. When he turned around, he saw that the 5-star army cavalry was less than 5 or 6 miles away from him. He immediately lost his mind. How dare you? Pointing angrily at the 1st Cavalry Division that was hot on his heels, Shintinya really wanted to reprimand them, and even more wanted to warn them that the capital of Peace City had solid walls. It was not a place where they could behave atrociously. Fukada Daimyo, let's enter the city first. Some of his subordinates saw that Fukada Tani was so angry that his face turned red. Although they were surprised by the arrogance of the 5-star army cavalry, they knew that they would only be safe if they entered the city. Shouting like this now was useless. All right, let's enter the city and order the soldiers to shoot arrows up the city walls. I would like to see if these cavalry can still fly up when faced with the solid city gates and city walls. Fukada Tani suppressed the anger in his heart. After saying this to his subordinates, he turned around and entered Ping and Beijing. After that, the city gate closed from the inside, completely closing when the 1st Cavalry Division was about 700 to 800 meters away. Once the city gates were closed, it was as if all dangers were isolated from the outside world. The Japanese army soldiers inside the gate let out a long sigh of relief. At the same time, more people rushed towards the 2 sides of the passage. They wanted to rush up the tower and use their bows and arrows to return fire. They wanted to let these arrogant 5-star army cavalry know the consequences of angering them. Major General Tianhu, who was charging forward with all his strength, watched as the south gate of Ping and Beijing was closed. His expression did not change at all. Since he wanted to attack Ping and Beijing in one go, he naturally made sufficient preparations before doing so. Where is the 1st Regiment commander? Tianhu slowed down the speed of his warhorse and turned around to ask. Commander, I'm here, Taimur answered loudly from dozens of meters behind him on the left. As the tip of another arrow, he had been following behind Tianhu the whole time, never leaving or abandoning him. When he saw Taimur and realized that he was very close to him, Tianhu's original serious expression changed. He laughed loudly and said, Very good, 1st Regiment commander. I'll leave the rest to you. Whether or not you can obtain the first merit will depend on your performance. Please rest assured, commander. Leave everything to the 1st Regiment, Taimur said with great ambition. Taimur said with great ambition. Then he suddenly tore open his jacket, revealing 4 black-headed, wooden-handled grenades. Taimur was not the only one who did this. His entire team of about 30 people tore open their coats, revealing the tightly wrapped grenades. Their faces were filled with bloodthirsty murderous intent. This was a group of lunatics. They actually strapped grenades to their bodies during a battle. If there were any sparks or if the fuse was accidentally triggered, wouldn't there be a huge accident? But it had to be said that although they were crazy, they had succeeded. At least they had not encountered any accidents when they reached this place. And it was because of their risk that they now had the opportunity to break through the city gate. Taimur and the other 30 people were making preparations. Tian, who was not idle either. He rode his horse to the south gate of Ping in Beijing. He put away his dual swords and picked up his strong bow. He aimed at the top of the city gate tower and was ready to shoot at any time. Almost as soon as Tianhu and his cavalrymen knocked their bows and arrows, many small heads of the Japanese army popped out from the city gate tower. They also had their bows and arrows ready and were looking down, ready to shoot their targets. As soon as they popped their heads out, both sides looked at each other and saw clearly. Tianhu's voice was then heard. "Release the arrows. Don't let them interfere with the 1st Regiment commander and the others." Swoosh, 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 swoosh. The sound of arrows piercing through the air was incessant. The sharp arrows were shot directly at the Japanese army soldiers who had popped their heads out. In a moment of carelessness, dozens of Japanese army soldiers were shot. Some of them collapsed to the ground while others fell from the tall city gate tower. This scene also frightened the other Japanese army soldiers. They quickly shrank back, trying to stay alive like turtles. Fukada Tani, who had just arrived at the city gate tower, saw this scene. He immediately shouted angrily, "What are you afraid of? We have the high ground and we have the city gate as our defense. They should be the ones who are worried." Everyone returned fire immediately. Return fire. Under the command of their general, the soldiers finally had a backbone. They were no longer as scared as before and could finally organize a decent counterattack. With the advantage of having the high ground, they caused a lot of trouble for the soldiers of the 1st Cavalry Division. They didn't have as many soldiers as the other side, and the terrain wasn't favorable to them. If it were any other army, they wouldn't take the risk to fight this battle. Even in front of the 1st Cavalry Division, Tian, whose expression was still cold. He immediately ordered the soldiers to take out their shields. 2 people in a group. 1 person with a bow and the other with a shield. We must create an opportunity for the 1st Regiment commander and the others to blow open the city gate. Tian, whose voice was very calm. It was obvious that this wasn't a temporary idea. In fact, the 1st Cavalry Division had also undergone such training in the past. It was to prevent such a situation from happening. The preparation came in handy. 2 soldiers formed a group. 1 person held a shield to protect himself and his comrades, while the other person held a bow to look for an opportunity to counterattack. Arrows fell like rain. There were nearly 10,000 Japanese Empire soldiers on the top of the southern city gate of Ping in Beijing. Even if each of them released an arrow, the momentum was enough to frighten people. Once the arrows fell from the sky and hit the cavalry below, it was like a torrential downpour. It was said that a chaotic fist could kill a master. Under the chaotic arrows, even the soldiers of the 1st Cavalry Division couldn't guarantee that they could escape unscathed. In less than half an hour, nearly 100 soldiers had been hit by arrows. Among them, more than 10 people had been hit in the vital areas and had already died. Hurry up, hurry up. Tian, who was very unwilling to see his brothers die in such a cowardly defense. When he turned to look at Taimur, his voice was filled with urgency. At this time, Taimur and the others had already removed all the grenades from their bodies and tied them together in groups of 4. After hearing his division commander's shout, Taimur was the first to charge. With his superb horse-riding skills, he held a shield in one hand and the 4 grenades tied together in the other. He charged fiercely toward the southern city gate of Ping in Beijing. Yang Qindong had once issued an order in the army. Unless it was absolutely necessary, the regimental commander or officers above the regimental commander level were not allowed to charge at will. After all, it wasn't easy to train such a high-ranking officer. He didn't want these outstanding talents to die in the chaos of a charge. Since it was Yang Qindong's order, everyone had to carry it out unconditionally. This was the importance of corps authority. However, this time Taimur broke this rule. Tianhu, who was watching all of this from a short distance, didn't stop him. This was because he knew very well that rules were dead but people were alive. The more critical the situation was, the more important it was for a general to stand up and set an example. Taimur took the lead and was the first to reach the city gate. When he reached the city gate, he threw the 4 grenades with their fuses already pulled out. Boom, 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 loud vibrations were heard. After a cloud of smoke, All the cavalrymen couldn't help but look toward the city gate. Unfortunately, it only covered the iron gate with a layer of black smoke. It didn't have much effect on the overall situation. Even grenades didn't work? It had to be said that the people of the Japanese Empire were very serious in their work. The quality of the city gate was really good. At the very least, it was beyond the expectations of the soldiers of the world's #1 cavalry division. Don't stop. Keep going. As long as you keep blasting, there's nothing you can't break. Tian, who wasn't discouraged even though his attack didn't work. Otherwise he wouldn't have brought so many grenades in one go. Yes, continue. Taimur had just retreated. He was initially shocked by the lack of effect. Now that he heard Tianhu's words, he nodded vigorously and ordered the other soldiers to continue charging. The explosions weren't completely useless. On the city gate tower, the soldiers of the Japanese Empire felt a tremor under their feet. Some of the more timid ones had already squatted down and covered their heads. As the commanding general, Fukada Tani was indeed a little more courageous. It wasn't that he wasn't afraid. It was just that he woke up earlier than the others. Haha, did you see that? Firearms are useless against the city gate. Everyone, don't worry. Continue to shoot arrows at the city gate tower. We have to use this opportunity to kill more enemies and gain more merits. Fukada Tani was very active at this moment. Relying on the advantage of defending the city, Fukada Tani was already fantasizing about the scene where they could inflict heavy damage on the cavalrymen of the 5-star army and gain great merits. Below the southern city gate, bundles of grenades were still exploding. The seemingly thick iron gate finally showed signs of loosening under the continuous bombardment. For this, the world's #1 cavalry division had paid the price of hundreds of men. Although less than 100 of them were killed by the arrows, more than 300 of them were injured. Many of them had already lost their ability to fight. It was conceivable that after this battle, they wouldn't be able to recover to their peak and could no longer stay in the army. Chapter 1104. Tian, whose heart bled at the sight of such heavy losses. These were all elite warriors. Losing any one of them would cause him to feel heartache, not to mention losing so many of them at once. Anxious, he continued to shout, "Regiment Commander 1, I'll give you 3 minutes. If you can't blow up the city gate, you'll be kicked out of the 1st Cavalry Division." Taimur was still watching his subordinates throw grenades at the city gate. Because of this, 3 of his brothers had already been killed by arrows and 2 of them were seriously injured. He was also feeling terrible. When he heard Tianhu's words, he was instantly enraged. "Come on, everyone, gather all the grenades and give them to me. I'll go all out." This was the only thought in Taimur's mind. There was nothing sadder than watching his brothers die in battle in front of him. Sometimes he wished he was the one who died. In order to reduce the losses and open the city gate faster, Taimur decided to go all out on his own. No one dared to disobey their regiment commander's orders. The soldiers around him quickly gathered the grenades and delivered them to Taimur. Everyone seemed to know what their regiment commander was going to do. One of his company commanders took the initiative and said, "Regiment commander, let me go. The power of so many grenades combined is too great. It's too dangerous. Our regiment can't do without our regiment commander." "Yeah, we can't do without our regiment commander," the other soldiers chimed in. "Cut the crap. I know what I'm going to do." Taimur didn't intend to listen to everyone's opinions. This was because he knew that this was an extremely dangerous move. What was dangerous was not whether they could reach the city gate, but the power of so many grenades exploding at the same time. The shockwave from the explosion would often cause people to be affected before they could completely retreat. That was the real danger. But so what if he knew it was dangerous? He was the regiment commander and enjoyed more glory than anyone else. When there was danger, he should naturally be the one to face it. Only then would he be worthy of everything he was enjoying now. With a cold expression, Taimur quickly tied all the grenades together. Looking at the bag of fire that was the size of a bag of explosives, he let out a silly laugh. He didn't believe that the city gate would be able to withstand such powerful explosives. "Everyone back off some more." Taimur weighed the explosive's power and realized that it could barely be held with one hand. Then he began to prepare to charge. Everyone retreated reluctantly and unwillingly. This was the military rule of the 5-star army. Once the commanding officer gave an order, the soldiers under him had to obey. It was this iron discipline that allowed them to fight well and win every battle. "Haha, let's go." Taimur removed the bow, shield, and 2 sabers from his horse. He wanted to go into battle light and maintain his fastest speed and best condition. After doing all this, he shouted boldly and galloped toward the city gate. The commotion here attracted the attention of the division commander, Tian Hu. When he saw Taimur rushing down the city gate tower alone on his horse, he couldn't help but cry out in alarm. F***CK Regiment Commander 1, come back. Taimur, who was already halfway out, couldn't carry out any military orders now. As the saying went, there was no turning back. If he stopped now, he would only suffer greater losses. Seeing Taimur rush toward the city gate without hesitation, Tian Hu, who usually didn't show his emotions on his face, had tears in his eyes. Brother, I wish you good luck. Everyone else quickly retreat. Retreat. Knowing the power of so many grenades combined, Tian Hu gave the order for the cavalry to retreat. Below the city gate tower, many Japanese Empire soldiers saw Taimur galloping toward them on horseback. Although they didn't know what he was going to do, they instinctively aimed their arrows at him. In a short period of time, Taimur was hit by 2 arrows. Fortunately, he was very experienced and managed to avoid the fatal blow. The 2 arrows only caused minor injuries to him. Grandsons, have a taste of the gifts Grandpa has prepared for you. Ah. Taimur, who had arrived at the city gate, pulled out a set of grenades with his left hand and threw them down the city gate. Then he pounced toward a puddle of water below the city gate tower. With such great power, he wouldn't even have the chance to retreat. Not to mention there were so many Japanese Empire soldiers eyeing him from the city gate tower. Taimur didn't plan to go back. Instead, he threw himself into the puddle of water, gambling on his luck. Just as Taimur's figure plunged into the puddle of water, a loud bang was heard. At this moment, the ground was shaking violently. Even the Japanese army soldiers on the city gate tower felt like they were losing their balance. Tian Hu and the others, who were a few hundred meters away from the city gate, were better off. After all, they had already mentally prepared themselves. However, after hearing the loud bang and not seeing Taimur running back, Tian Hu couldn't help but feel his eyes turn red. Brothers, the city gate has been blown open. Our 1st Regiment commander paid the price with his life. Everyone listen to my orders. Charge, kill. Kill, kill, kill. Influenced by Taimur, the eyes of the other soldiers also turned red. Then, under the command of their division commander, all of them rushed toward the south gate that had been blown open by the powerful grenades. Right now, they only had one thought in mind: to avenge their 1st Regiment commander and wipe out the Japanese army. With the city gate broken, the cavalry of the 5-star army rushed into the city. Fukada Tani, who had a smug look on his face, turned gloomy. Very quickly it turned into fear. He knew that they were done for this time. Although there weren't many cavalrymen, the morale of the troops was in chaos. They couldn't put up any effective resistance at all. General, let's retreat. 2 soldiers walked up to Fukada Tani anxiously and helped him up. Then they quickly ran down the city gate tower. After the 1st Cavalry Division entered the city, their advantage began to increase. With the help of the war horses, wherever they went, the Japanese army was slaughtered until they were wailing like ghosts and howling like wolves. At the same time, because the 1st Cavalry Division's movements were too fast, a lot of the Japanese army's supplies were left behind. When Tian Hu saw the mountain of rations and equipment under the escort of a group of soldiers, a smile finally appeared on this major general's face. What made him even happier was that the 1st Regiment of soldiers found Taimur at the bottom of the city gate tower. He had cleverly jumped into the ditch and managed to survive with the protection of the water. However, the power of the explosion was too strong and he was knocked unconscious. At the same time, his armor was torn and his back was covered in wounds. Taimur is still alive. That's great. Gather the best medical officers in the division immediately. We must preserve the life of the 1st Regiment commander. Our world's #1 Cavalry Division cannot be without him. Tian Hu was naturally overjoyed as he spoke. Then he couldn't stop laughing foolishly. After the 1st Cavalry Division entered the city, they first guarded some important places in the city. In the end, because of the lack of manpower, they did not chase after Fukada Tani and the rest of the Japanese army who had escaped. More than 2 hours later, the new army also entered the city, and the situation in the city was completely stabilized. At this point, it could be announced that Ping and Beijing had completely fallen into the hands of the 5-star army. Yang Qindong entered Ping and Beijing the next afternoon accompanied by Junko. The 1st Cavalry Division did not disappoint. Under the circumstances where the 4th Army Division and the 7th Army Firearms Division were not in place, they blew up the city gate alone and made a great contribution. This made Yang Qindong very happy. He first went to the temporary hospital to visit Taimur, who had already been treated and had woken up. From the military doctor, he learned that Taimur only had a back injury and that it was not a serious problem. After resting for a few days he could continue to fight. Yang Chendong was even more happy. In the temporary hospital, in front of everyone, he recorded Taimur's first-class merit and at the same time, awarded him a Medal of Bravery. This was the first time the Medal of Bravery was presented to the public. In the past, people had only heard of it but no one had ever seen it, let alone received this honor. In the midst of everyone's envy, Taimur received the Medal of Bravery. His entire body was grinning from ear to ear. At this moment he enjoyed everyone's congratulations and blessings, but he also enjoyed all the envy and jealousy. Major General Tian Hu was also one of them. He had also dreamed of receiving this Medal of Bravery one day. This was the only way to prove his strength. However, this time not only did he not receive it, but he was also reprimanded by Yang Chendong. Didn't I say that regimental officers can't casually charge with the army? You, on the other hand, directly let the regiment commander take the risk. Fortunately, nothing happened to Taimur, otherwise I would definitely punish you. After there was no one else around, Yang Chendong's face turned cold as he reprimanded Tian Hu. Teacher, I was wrong. Tian Hu, who had always been proud, did not even dare to breathe when facing Yang Chendong. He knew very well who gave him everything he had. And this time he was indeed a little reckless. Seeing that Tian Hu's attitude of admitting his mistake was not bad, Yang Chendong's anger subsided. Alright, don't do it again. Also, you guys have worked hard this time. When you go back, look for Beta Persei. He will prepare enough wine and meat for you to celebrate. Okay. When he heard that there was a celebration, Tian Hu chuckled. At this moment he was no different from a child who had received candy. This was all because this celebration was arranged by his teacher for the 1st Cavalry Division. This was enough to prove that their division's performance in this operation was the best, and the best. Just as Tian Hu thought, once the news that the 1st Cavalry Division was allowed to hold a celebration by Yang Chendong spread, it attracted the envy and jealousy of the other divisions. Chapter 1105. The 5-star army was usually treated very well. Even when there was no war, they were always given food and wine. However, this celebration banquet was different. The 6th young master had given them special permission. This proved the importance of the 1st Cavalry Division. We have to perform well. Next time, we can't let the world's 1st Cavalry Division get all the glory. Su He, the commander of the new 3rd Army, called over a few of his division commanders and said with high fighting spirit, "That's right. As long as we work hard, the new army will definitely be the one celebrating next time," said the division commanders in unison. The same scene was happening in the other units as well. Even the 4th and 7th divisions of the Lu army were not spared from this. The cold front represented the most elite troops. However, ever since the 1st Cavalry Division appeared, they had lost a lot of their limelight. Because of this, the division commanders of the 4th Division and 7th Division were very depressed. They secretly decided that they would perform better in the next battle. They wanted to prove to the world that the cold front was still the cold front. They were still the most powerful existence. An army's morale, equipment, and combat power were the comprehensive criteria to determine whether an army was strong or not. Everyone had their own thoughts. How to unify these people's thoughts and unleash double the power of an army was something the commander had to consider. If the commander was good, it was very likely that 10,000 people could unleash the combat power of 20,000 or even more. On the other hand, if the commander was not good, the 10,000 people might not even be able to unleash half of their combat power. A single celebration banquet was enough to ignite the fighting spirit of all the troops. This was the embodiment of Yang Chendong's talent in commanding. In particular, Taimur receiving the 1st Hero's Medal had greatly stimulated the others. Taimur used to be a Manchu. He was promoted to the Han race because of his outstanding performance. He had received the 1st Warrior's Medal, which was more representative. It showed that the 6th young master treated everyone equally. At the same time, it also encouraged more people. They believed that as long as they did not care about their background, they would also have a better performance and receive more honor through hard work. The appearance of the celebration banquet and the Warrior Medal had already excited the soldiers of the 5-star army stationed in Ping and Beijing. They couldn't wait to fight on the battlefield. They needed a better opportunity and platform to perform. Yang Chendong didn't seem to care about all this. At this moment he was accompanying Princess Junko in the imperial palace in Ping and Beijing. When he returned to this place again, the environment had not changed much, but his companions had indeed changed. Now that her father and mother were gone, Junko could only rely on her husband Yang Qindong. In a long corridor in the imperial palace, Junko leaned into Yang Qindong's arms like a little bird. Her eyes were looking at Mount Fuji, also known as Sakura Mountain, not far away. King, you will accompany Junko until she is old, right? Yes. King, you will never abandon Junko or dislike Junko, right? Yes. King, even if Junko is old and no longer young and beautiful, you will still like Junko, right? Yes. King, yes. Uehara Toda, who was on his way to the northern land road from the Shanin Road, received the news that the five-star army had conquered Ping and Beijing. So fast. When he received the news, Uehara Toda was resting in a temporary tent, and then his face showed a shocked expression. He thought that with the strength of the five-star army, conquering Ping and Beijing with only 30,000 people was just a matter of time, but he did not expect it to be so fast. From the beginning to the end of the attack, it was less than 2 days. Did the seemingly well-defended Japanese Empire's Kyoto fall just like that? He did not know whether he should be lamenting the incompetence of the Supreme General's subordinates, or the five-star army was too powerful. But no matter what the result was, Uehara Toda knew that he should speed up. He wanted to take advantage of the fact that the Supreme General was heavily injured to fight back. He wanted to let others know that not only was the five-star army good at fighting, but he was also very good at fighting. Pass down the order, don't rest. Immediately speed up the march, reach Ekizan Prefecture as soon as possible, and stab Ashikaga Yoshimasa in the ass. Uehara Toda was stimulated and finally decided to speed up the march. He, who was eager to make a contribution, did not know that there was a big ambush waiting for him in front. Ruan-Naro area, adjacent to the Shanin Road's Danho Prefecture, is the gateway to the Northern Land Road. Uehara Toda suddenly appeared with 70,000 soldiers, and it seemed to have caught the enemy off guard. After resisting for a while, the Supreme General's army began to retreat, giving up the entire Ruan-Naro area, and Uehara Toda won the first battle. After winning the first battle, Uehara Toda's morale quickly swelled, and he continued to send his troops to Etsu Prefecture. In his opinion, the Supreme Generalissimo should be focused on dealing with Hirai Ueda, and he would not have time to deal with him. This was his chance. Ekizan Prefecture, one of the largest prefectures in the Northern Land Road. Here, the Maori regularization led 100,000 Japanese army to wait for the arrival of Uehara Toda. In order to lure this opponent to appear faster, the Japanese army in Ruan-Naro area took the initiative to retreat. All of this was also the order of the Maori regularization. The purpose was to make the opponent proud and arrogant, and then when the opponent was the most complacent and the defense was the most lax, they would give a heavy blow, proving to the Japanese Empire that the Supreme General's army was still the most capable. Dashi River is the burial ground that the Maori regularization prepared for Uehara Toda's 70,000 soldiers. This is a river that was brought inland by the sea. In the beginning it was used to irrigate the farmland. Later, after the passage of time, it became a large river that was 17 or 18 meters wide. It meandered along the side of the road, like a long dragon entrenched in this area. The Maori regularization set the attack site here after serious consideration. With the river as the base, once the battle starts, the existence of Dashi River will become an excellent cover, allowing him to launch all kinds of attacks as he pleases. The Dashi River was blocked by a dense forest. It was precisely because of the existence of this forest that soil erosion was prevented, which prevented the river from continuing to expand. The Maori regularization's backup plan was placed in this dense forest. After the Supreme General gave the task, the Maori regularization began to prepare. First, he arranged for people to speed up the construction of the catapults. He doesn't need to attack too far away as long as the catapults can hit more than 40 meters away, that is, 120 meters away. At that time he is confident that the enemy can only defend and not attack. The requirements are not high and he has the full support of the Supreme General, and the construction is in the dense forest so he can use the nearby materials. 300 small catapults were quickly built, and after experiments, it was confirmed that the catapults can hit more than 50 meters to 100 meters. The Maori regularization was already very satisfied. 10,000 soldiers were left in the dense forest, and an average of 30 people were left in front of each catapult. It was enough. Mao Lijing brought the rest of the 90,000 soldiers to the other side of Dazahe, hiding in the uneven terrain about 5 miles away from Dazahe. Now what he has to do is wait for the fish to take the bait. Completely unaware of all this, Uehara Toda, who was eager to prove himself, only arranged some scouts to do the preliminary battle, and quickly went all the way to Ekizan Prefecture. When those scouts passed by one side of the Daji River, they didn't stop there. Because such a wide river was the safest place. Nobody could make use of such a terrain to set an ambush. However, they ignored the dense woods behind the river. After 6 days of preparation, Uehara Toda appeared, and together with him, there was a vast army of 70,000 soldiers walking on the official road, and looking from afar, there was no end to it. However, for many people, this would be the last time they would walk on this land because it wouldn't be long before they would meet the King of Hell and become a soul without a physical body, or even a pile of bones without a soul. Perhaps the shinobi wanted to destroy Uehara Toda, but in the afternoon he ordered the army to stop and camp, and stop at the side of Dashi River. Maybe he thought that resting by the river would be safe and solve the problem of the army's water source. When the Maori regularization, who was already prepared to attack, heard this news, he almost jumped up in excitement. In the end, he suppressed his excitement and decided to change the time of the battle. When the opponent's military tents are set up, and when the opponent's army is eating, he will launch a fierce attack, and he will get the best result. More than an hour later, the sky gradually darkened, and the smell of food wafted out of the camp by the river. At this time, countless boulders suddenly fell from the sky. Some of them were catapults that threw gunpowder that the Neon had learned from the Great Ming Dynasty. For a time, it was like a heavy rain falling into Uehara Toda's army, making the 70,000-man army dizzy. The sudden attack, whether it was the gunpowder or the boulders, most of them fell beside the military tents, and some of them accurately fell in the military tents, killing many people on the spot. Watching this scene, Uehara Toda, who was lucky enough not to be hit, was scared and horrified. He did not expect that the Grand General had already sent people to stop him. To think that he had thought that no one would know about his actions. But at this moment he didn't have time to think about why the news was leaked, why the army general's army was defeated again and again, and why he prepared an ambush in advance and organized this unexpected counterattack. Now, he was only thinking about how to counterattack and stabilize his position. Under Yang Qindong's orders, the secret letter that Dao Xiao forced Ning Shidaxiu to write finally worked, and it gave Ashikaga Yoshimasa more time to react, which led to Uehara Toda's current disaster. Chapter 1106. After all, Uehara Toda was the general of the army, and he had been in charge of the mountain for many years, so he still had basic military knowledge. Through the trajectory of the falling boulders, he quickly locked the location of the attack behind the dense forest. He immediately ordered people to try to shoot arrows into the dense forest, wanting to reverse the situation in one fell swoop. Maori regularization was already prepared for this. With the dense forest as a defense, ordinary arrows couldn't shoot in at all, not to mention that the ambush team was already far away from the range of the arrows. On the other hand, the catapults were launched from a distance and could ignore the dense forest. This created an overwhelming advantage. They could only take a beating and not hit anyone. After an hour of attack, who knows how many explosives and boulders fell in the encampment, who knows how many people were killed and injured. Finally, the attack slowed down, and the materials that had been prepared for several days were about to be used up. The main character, Mao Lijing, appeared. As early as half an hour ago he actually started the operation, but because of the distance he always needed time to close the distance between the two sides. When they could finally see Uehara Toda's army camp, it happened to be when the catapult stopped working. Then, under Maori regularization's order, the 90,000 troops were like a swarm of wasps, densely packed and overwhelming. If the army wasn't in chaos, 70,000 people would have the power to fight 90,000 people. On the contrary, Uehara Toda, who was defending, might have a certain advantage. But now the army was scattered and the casualties were heavy. Under the chaos of the army, how could they organize a decent counterattack? Seeing the dense enemy rushing over, the army's morale quickly collapsed. The 70,000 troops didn't even have the chance to organize a decent resistance, and they were scattered by the flow of soldiers coming from afar. The army was defeated like a landslide. At this moment, only such words could be used to describe it. Faced with the sudden arrival of Maori regularization's 90,000 troops, it was like a divine army descending from the sky. On one side, the army's morale was scattered, and on the other side the battle was about to end before it even started. This was not a fair battle. If Uehara Toda could make the right judgment from the beginning of the attack and lead the troops to escape from here, maybe he could return to the mountain inn and find a way to reorganize. But now Uehara Toda, who didn't have time to make any preparations, was surrounded by Maori regularization and then killed in the chaos. Uehara Toda was dead. Uehara Toda, who controlled the 80,000 troops and the actual ruler of the mountain in the mountain area, was dead. His death also meant that the series of treaties he had signed with Yang Qindong had become a waste of paper. After receiving the news through the telegram, the special envoy who signed the contract got up and walked toward the Great Zay County Magistrate's mansion. Days Mountain in the mountain in the mountain in the mountain in the mountain. The warlord in charge of guarding this place was called Sensei Naganabu. He was the leader of the younger generation of the Kozii family, and he was also the person who was chosen by Yang Qindong. The Kozii family was a family with a long history in the Japanese Empire. Their ancestors were once glorious, and there were records that the earliest rulers of the mountain in the mountain area were actually the Kozii family. But that was an ancient legend and there was no way to verify it. In the eyes of many people, this was just the Kozii family's people flattering themselves. But as a member of the Kozii family, they were proud of it, and they dreamed that one day they could rebuild their glory and prove that the Kozii family's bloodline was the strongest. Dreams were beautiful but reality was cruel. In the chaotic Japanese Empire, the warlords were everywhere, and the Kozii family who retreated to the Days Mountain only had a 10,000-man army. This 10,000-man army was already the most powerful existence in the Days Mountain, but compared to the other warlords nearby, it seemed so weak. Not to mention facing the hundreds of thousands of troops of the great general Ashikaga Yoshimasa, even facing the actual ruler of the mountain in the mountain in the mountain in the mountain, the 10,000-man army in their hands was simply not enough. Since the time was not ripe, they could only continue to lie low and wait for the opportunity to rise. Opportunities were always prepared for those who were prepared. Guanxing came to the door. The two sides had been in contact before, and the Kozii family accepted him as the special envoy of the 5-star army. This time he directly appeared in front of Sensei Naganabu. There's news from the front lines. Uehara Toda was ambushed by the Maori regularization and died in the battle. Now the mountain in 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 the mountain. The great general's tentacles are about to reach here. Meiji-kun, your chance to shine has come. Guanxing said the new news with a serious face. At this moment, Sensei Naganabu's face was already red, representing the excitement in his heart. That's great, it's finally time for the Kozii family to rise. Thank you very much, envoy. The Kozii family is also willing to follow Bugnam of Gojoseon's lead and listen to his orders. There was no free lunch in the sky. Guanxing supported Sensei Naganabu on the basis that the Kozii family was willing to follow Yang Qindong's lead. Without this premise, a small county magistrate with a 10,000-man army wouldn't be able to afford Guanxing's personal visit. Very good, I will convey your loyalty to Bugnam of Gojoseon. Let's proceed according to the plan. Rest assured, Meiji-kun, the 5-star army will cooperate with you in the dark. Guanxing nodded with satisfaction. One needed a chance to rise while the other needed a puppet to achieve his goal. The two sides hit it off and quickly walked together. Yang Qindong's plan was finally revealed. The so-called alliance with Uehara Toda was just a formality. There were too few things that Uehara Toda could ask for help from him. If he supported him greatly, he might be able to severely damage the great general's forces and even defeat them. But who could guarantee that after victory Uehara Toda wouldn't become the next great general? Since he couldn't be controlled, he might as well not control him and just treat him as an abandoned pawn. This was why Dao Xiao forced Ning Shidaxiu to write a letter so that Ashikaga Yoshimasa could make preparations in advance. When the plan reached this point, Sensei Naganabu, who could be controlled, appeared. He would become the representative of the 5-star army and help them unify the Japanese Empire. Sensei Naganabu, who had the support of the 5-star army, was full of confidence. He first sent people to invite the two county magistrates to his house. At the banquet, a pile of silver was brought out. Pointing at the 200,000 taels of silver, Mingji Changshin promised that as long as the two county magistrates recognized him as their leader, each of them could take 100,000 taels of silver back. At the same time, they would also receive a monthly payment of silver. If they achieved outstanding military service, they would also be heavily rewarded. No one wouldn't be tempted. Relying on the silver, Sensei Naganabu's force increased from 10,000 people to 30,000 people. It was still not enough to be an enemy of the great general, but at least it was a good start. At this moment, Sensei Naganabu was full of confidence and began to conquer the world. Ping in Beijing Imperial Palace. This place had become the place where Yang Qindong's camp was located. The side hall, which was originally used to receive ministers, had been changed into a military conference room. A large sand table had been placed on the table. If one looked carefully, they would find that the Nanhai Road of Neon was marked on it. They had already occupied Ping in Beijing, Zakato, and Shanyodu. Now that Shanyodu had the Masayoshi family as their representative, the five-star army's progress after entering the Japanese Empire could be said to be smooth. Considering the lack of military strength, Yang Qindong decided to stop expanding on land and set his sights on the sea. As the Japanese Empire's largest naval base, Nankato would be his next main target. In the conference room, Yang Qindong's eyes casually fell on the commander of the C-4th Division, Ding Yen, and said, "Tell me about the situation." "Yes, 6th young master." Ding Yen stood up, then picked up a wooden stick that had been placed earlier. He pointed to the sand table and said, "Everyone please take a look. Nanhai Road is surrounded by water on all sides and the sea on the east side. It has become an independent existence separate from the entire Neon land. Especially Ge Prefecture, which belongs to this area. It is located to the south of Ping in Beijing and can be a threat to us at any time. It really makes people restless. Nankato is also the base of the Japanese Empire's naval forces because of its unique geography. According to the Intelligence Department, there are thousands of ships and 400,000 soldiers in the Japanese Empire. Some of the ships are also equipped with earth cannons, which have an effective attack range of up to 1,200 meters. Although it is not as good as some of the Big F countries, it is not far behind. If the distance is too far, it will also become a threat. The commander of the Japanese Empire's naval forces in Nankato is called Mr. Kuroda. He is an experienced veteran of naval warfare. At the same time, he is also a direct subordinate of Ashikaga Yoshimasa. He is highly valued by him. Due to the geography of Nankato, there are many large reefs in the nearby waters. Once a large ship gets close and goes the wrong way, it is very likely to hit the bottom and sink. Although our intelligence department has worked very hard and obtained a lot of information about the geography of this area, no one can be sure that there is nothing left out. Before we have a complete understanding of the situation, I do not recommend launching a large-scale attack. Ding Yen was ordered to give a detailed explanation of the situation in Nanhai Province, including the comparison of the enemy's military strength and the comparison of the environmental conditions. Listening to this, the other officers at the meeting all had a solemn expression. Compared to the 400,000 soldiers of the Japanese army and more than 1,000 ships of various types, they still had the geographical advantage. On the 5-star army side, there were only High 4 and High 5 divisions. Together, there were only 240 ships. Even if they added the 20,000 soldiers of the Korean Navy and more than 100 ships, there were only less than 40,000 soldiers and 400 ships. With less than 40,000 soldiers against 400,000, and 400 ships against more than 1,000 ships, this battle was not going to be easy. To be more precise, they would be thankful if the Japanese Empire's navy did not attack them, let alone take the initiative to start a naval war. Chapter 1107. However, when everyone's gazes landed on Yang Qindong, who was sitting at the head of the table, everyone's expressions calmed down a lot. As long as the 6th young master was there, no one knew what fear was. Countless facts had proven that the 6th young master was extremely good at defeating enemies with fewer people. As the soul of the army, Yang Qindong felt everyone's gazes on him, but he didn't feel uncomfortable at all. This was because he didn't know how many times he had experienced this kind of situation. This was just one of the countless times he had experienced it. Alright, Commander Ding has already explained the situation very clearly. I'm sure everyone knows what we're going to face next. And this young master only has one thing to add. Although the enemy has 400,000 soldiers, they're actually just a motley crew. Their cannons have a short firing range and they're very old. It's very troublesome to reload them. Not only are our weapons superior to theirs, but we're also not too far behind them in terms of military strength. You should know that this time, we're mobilizing the army and the navy. When Yang Qindong's confident voice resounded in the hall, everyone who heard it revealed a look of confidence on their faces. All of this was brought to them by Yang Qindong, the absolute core. As long as the sixth young master was there, they firmly believed that there wouldn't be any difficulties that could stop them. It was also this existence that led them from nothing to something, from a young age to an adult, to achieve the results they had now. The actions of one person could affect everyone present. This was the important role of a core. Noticing that everyone's faces had become more confident, Yang Qindong continued, "There are 4 steps to dealing with the Japanese Army's navy: cavalry attack the Vietnamese line, navy attack Awaji Island, 2 areas of scorched earth, South Sea encircle but don't attack." These 20 words meant that Yang Qindong had already planned for the attack on the Japanese naval division. It wasn't a spur-of-the-moment decision. Listening to the detailed strategy from his mouth, everyone in the meeting nodded their heads and looked at him with admiration. Even after becoming the Bugnam of Gojoseon, the sixth young master was still the invincible military god on the battlefield. The meeting went on for more than 2 hours. In the end, everyone in the meeting approved Yang Qindong's military proposal with a unanimous vote. After that, everyone began to divide the work and began to do their own things. As the person who proposed the plan, Yang Qindong's main task this time was to set Ping in Beijing as a deterrent to anyone who wanted to attack on him. He believed that with him in the formation, anyone who wanted to attack Ping in Beijing would have to think carefully before doing so. In addition to being in the middle of the formation, Yang Qindong also took the 2 plans of the cavalry attack the Vietnamese line and the navy attack Awaji Island. At this moment, standing in front of him was the new army's commander, Su He. This was originally a general in the Tatar army. He could be said to be an all-rounder. Ever since he surrendered to the 5-star army, he displayed all his talents and finally became a true general in the 5-star army. He also held the position of commander of the army. People like this were usually very proud. This might be a common problem for talented people. However, when facing Yang Qindong, he didn't dare to show even the slightest bit of his temper. There was no other reason other than the fact that the strength of the person in front of him was far greater than his. Perhaps when 2 people's strength were equal, they wouldn't be convinced of each other's strength. Or if one side was slightly stronger, the other side would want to surpass him at any time. However, when one side was much stronger than the other, even if they tried to catch up, they wouldn't be able to surpass him in time. What was left was only admiration and admiration. Yang Qindong, who had the absolute right to speak and had absolute authority, faced Su He without any pleasantries. He directly said, "This time the 1st Cavalry Division will stay in Ping in Beijing. Next, it will be the time for the new army to play the main role. Are you confident?" "Sixth young master, we are confident. I am willing to make a military pledge." Knowing that the world's 1st Cavalry Division was finally not going to steal the limelight, Su He immediately said with some excitement. Although he was very proud in his heart, even when the world's 1st Cavalry Division was established, he was a very popular candidate for the position of commander. Later he took the initiative to develop his style and gave the position to Tian Hu, which became a kind of story. There were also people who always talked about this matter. They said that even if Su He became the commander of the 1st Cavalry Division, he might not be worse than Tian Hu. Every time he heard this, Su He's face would have a satisfied and humble smile. However, only he knew in his heart that Tian Hu was indeed very capable. Even if he didn't choose to give up at that time and really became the commander, he might not be able to do better than Tian Hu. Although he admired Tian Hu's ability in his heart, the proud Su He wouldn't say it out loud. On the contrary, he used this as a motivation to constantly push himself forward. He hoped that one day he could surpass Tian Hu and let everyone know that when he gave the position of commander to Tian Hu, he really did it and not because he was forced to. A person with a goal needed an opportunity. Now that Yang Qindong put the opportunity in front of him, how could Su He not fight for it? Therefore at this time he patted his chest and promised. His appearance really made people worry that he would hit himself and cause internal injuries. "Good, it's good that you are confident," Yang Qindong timely said, stopping Su He's self-harm, and then talked about the specific matters. The so-called cavalry attack on the Vietnam line referred to the land route from Ping in Beijing to Ji County, which was part of Nanhai Province. The distance between the 2 sides was a bit too close. If this place was not pacified, Ping in Beijing would be attacked at any time, and long-term stability would become a joke. Ji County, which was separated from Nanhai Province, naturally became a place that had to be attacked. It also gave the new army an opportunity to perform. The investigation data from the intelligence department has been sent over. Ji County is not small, and it is only close to the bustling Ping in Beijing. It has a dense population of 800,000 civilians and 80,000 soldiers. This time, your new army will only have 40,000 soldiers from the 1st and 2nd divisions, in addition to your new army's 3 cavalry divisions. With 60,000 soldiers against 80,000, and at the same time facing an extremely unfamiliar environment and terrain, you must mentally prepare yourself for a bitter battle. In addition, your new army will also need to send a cavalry division to help the 1st Reserve Division and the 3rd Division to attack Awaju Island. I hope that the cavalry division you send out will be an elite division, understand? As Yang Qindong said this, he didn't forget to carefully look at Su He's face. Things had to be prioritized and people were easily swayed by emotions. Since he was going to send a cavalry division to help the 1st Reserve Division, there was a high possibility that Su He would selfishly send out the weakest division in order to complete his mission. If that happened, the mission of attacking Awaju Island would undoubtedly become more difficult. This was not something that Yang Qindong wanted to see. Where there were people, there would be internal strife. This was a principle that had never changed since ancient times. Yang Qindong did not attempt to change him. But since he had the final say here, then he definitely would not allow internal strife to affect the overall situation and affect the plan. If someone really did that, then they should just go to wherever it was cool and stay there. It was not easy to find a 3-legged toad, but there were plenty of 2-legged people. Hearing Yang Qindong's reminder, Su He immediately stood at attention and said solemnly, "6th young master, please do not worry. Su He will not let you down. The cavalry division sent to Awaju Island will definitely be the most elite." Very good. This is actually to help you complete your mission better. Because once we attack Awaju Island, the 1st Reserve Division will come back to reinforce you. At that time it will greatly reduce the pressure on you. Do you understand? Yang Qindong nodded in satisfaction. He believed that since he had said this much, as long as Su He was not stupid, he should know how to cooperate. Su He left. The military plan was already in his heart. Next, he called a meeting with the 4 division commanders to discuss the matter of sending out troops. After he left, the 1st Reserve Division's division commander, Su Kuda, walked into the main tent with a face full of excitement and came in front of Yang Qindong. As the 1st Division commander of the 1st Reserve Division, Su Kuda knew that he was someone who was about to be put in an important position. He was the important reserve cadre that everyone was talking about. The premise was that as long as he performed well, his future would naturally not be worrying. Therefore, during his time as the division commander of the 1st Reserve Division, he scrupulously abided by his duties and only focused on his job. That was to gather the veterans who had been on the battlefield and had been tempered by the battlefield under his wing. He took care of them and trained them strictly. Considering that the 1st Reserve Division did not have any war missions and only continuously absorbed qualified and mature veterans, and continuously accommodated them, it caused the original 20,000 people of a division to reach the current 35,000 people. It was completely qualified to be called an army. Although he was called a division commander, he was indeed leading an army of soldiers. If it were any other general, they would have already become arrogant. At the very least, they would have taken the initiative to ask for money and use this to expand their influence. However, when it came to Su Kuda, he did not do that. Not only that, but he also changed from a division commander to a logistics manager. Considering that the soldiers were from various ethnic groups and regions, he did his best to care about their lives and not let them have the thought that they were excluded from the collective. It was precisely because of his correct guidance that although the composition of the 1st Reserve Division was extremely complicated, there were no incidents of infighting among the soldiers. This was already very difficult. This naturally attracted Yang Qindong's praise and attention. Since he was a useful talent, Yang Qindong naturally would not let his own hands be covered in dust. This time he called Su Kuda over to assign him an important military mission. Good steel could not always be polished. It had to be unsheathed to see blood. Chapter 1108. Su Kuda also knew that there was a task for him. At this moment he was very excited, but he still tried his best to show a calm face. How is the army's morale? As soon as they met, Yang Qindong did not immediately give him a task, but was concerned about the army's morale. Replying to the 6th young master, there is no problem at all. All the soldiers are people who have experienced life and death on the battlefield, and now they are eager to achieve more merits. Su Kuda answered truthfully. Yang Qindong nodded lightly. The composition of your 1st Reserve Division is complicated. Although they are not new recruits and know the discipline of the army because they have all seen blood and killed people, and some of them have even walked out of life and death situations. These people are often harder to manage. If there is a mistake, it will be a big problem. As the head steward, you have to put in a lot of effort, especially thinking you can't stop for a moment. Even Yang Qindong had called out the name of the head steward, causing Su Kuda to smile mischievously and guarantee, "Sixth young master, please rest assured, this student will not dare to neglect even a little bit." Su Kuda, who had graduated from the Academy of Crimson City, called himself a student was not a problem. After all, the title of the first dean of the Academy of Crimson City was Yang Qindong's. "Good, it's good that you have such confidence. Since that is the case, I can pass on the next task to you without worry. Come, tell this young master what you know about Awaju Island." Yang Qindong began to test the other party. Many times, in a war, you need to know yourself and know your enemy. It is not something that can be done well just by being hot-blooded. Hearing Yang Qindong call himself the young master in front of him, Su Kuda was a little excited. After Yang Qindong was given the title of Bugnam of Gojoseon by the Emperor of Baiming, in most situations he called himself the king. Only in front of people he thought were close would he call himself the young master. Since Su Kuda was able to enjoy such treatment, it proved that he had already become a close person in Yang Qindong's eyes. Naturally, he was very excited. In order to perform better, he gathered his words and said, "Sixth young master, Awaju Island is an independent island. It is the bridge between Nanhai Province and Ge Prefecture, as well as the transit station for goods. As long as we occupy this place, the entire South Sea Road will be isolated." Listening to Su Kuda's knowledge of Awaju Island, Yang Qindong nodded with satisfaction from time to time. It was good that the other party had done the work in advance. He liked the officers under him to use their brains. Only such people could better deal with complicated situations. Only then could they cope with changes by sticking to the status quo. Only then could they take charge of one side of the battlefield. Not long after, Su Kuda also left in satisfaction. In the end, Yang Qindong handed the task of capturing Awaju Island to the 1st Preparatory Division. There were 50,000 Japanese army soldiers there. It was enough to fill their stomachs. Of course, what made Su Kuda even more excited was that Yang Qindong had already promised that if the 1st Preparatory Division had soldiers who performed well, they could be considered to be promoted to the Cold Front Division or the 1st World Cavalry Division. Whether it was the Cold Front Division or the 1st Cavalry Division, they were all the best of the best in the 5-star army. Every soldier would be proud to be able to enter one of them. Not to mention other things, just being able to enter the Han Dynasty was the dream of many people. If you don't believe me, you can take a look at the treatment of the Han people in Yangxia. It would definitely make other people envious. A person's birth couldn't be changed, but through hard work, one could be promoted to the Han Dynasty. From there, one's descendants would have the opportunity to become a respected existence. That was also a very good thing. This was also why many of the foreign soldiers who joined the 5-star army often performed very well on the battlefield. With such a great temptation, there were very few people who could refuse. Now that he had received Yang Qindong's promise, it could be seen that once the foreign soldiers below heard this news, it would be impossible for them not to fight with all their might. After talking to Su He and Su Kuda separately, Yang Qindong picked up the secret letters and documents on the desk. His attention was focused on Sensei Naganabu of Shanin. Sending troops to attack Nankado, stabilizing the east and south of the Japanese Empire, and at the same time destroying the Japanese Naval Division. This would completely cut off their escape route. This was one of Yang Qindong's plans. However, whether or not this plan could be carried out ultimately depended on whether Ashikaga Yoshimasa would come out and cause trouble. In truth, the time for the army to enter the Japanese Empire was not completely ripe. At the very least, the number of soldiers was far from Yang Qindong's expectations. Currently, in the Asian region, the Japanese Empire was second only to the Great Ming Dynasty. Whether it was the population or the strength of the army, the Japanese Empire was ranked at the top. When facing such a power, it was either not to make a move or to make a move. One had to make a move until the enemy was eliminated. Otherwise, there would be a lot of trouble. It was also a coincidence that the Emperor of the Backyard Garden could not hold back and made the first move. After the first attack failed, Yang Qindong fell into a passive situation. This was a good opportunity for internal strife, and Yang Qindong absolutely could not miss it. Otherwise, when Ashikaga Yoshimasa unified the entire Japanese Empire, if he wanted to deal with him at that time, he would undoubtedly have to pay a much greater price. Thus Yang Qindong came. He appeared on the land of the Japanese Empire with a not very sufficient army. This was why he was able to fight steadily and surely. It was not like when he dealt with the other small countries in Southeast Asia, where he did not make a move, but once he made a move he would use thunderous means. Since he knew that he did not have enough troops, Yang Qindong had to think of other methods. The best method he could think of was to use the Japanese against the Japanese. Nurturing a force to let the Neon people fight against the Neon people was like how the traitor Old Wang was supported by the Neon people of later generations. Thus, Masashi Naganabu became an important chess piece. A lot of secret letters were written about Sensei Naganabu. Most of them were good news. The last secret letter wrote that Sensei Naganabu had unified most of the warlords in the Shanin-do, and the military strength had increased from the original 10,000 to 50,000. Of course, Sensei Naganabu had the wisdom to do this, but more than that, it was because Yang Qindong could afford it. In the face of absolute benefits, not many Japanese army generals could resist the temptation. It was just that 50,000 people were not enough to face the 100,000 troops led by Maori regularization that were about to enter the Shanin-do. Looking at the secret letter, Yang Qindong hesitated for a moment, then wrote a note. Add another 1 million silver taels. In any case, Sensei Naganabu cannot be defeated in the short term. After writing this note, Yang Qindong called Beta Persei, who was guarding outside the door, and handed the note to him and asked him to do it immediately. This was related to his conquest of the entire Japanese Empire. He could not afford to lose. Beta Persei respectfully took the note and left. Before he left, he handed another urgent telegram to Yang Qindong. This was a telegram from Kusanagi City. Not to mention the content, just the names of Tiger's Mane, Yumian and Yangtze were all included in the telegram, which was enough to prove the importance of this telegram. Looking at the main body of the telegram, he saw the three of them pleading to send troops to Baiming. Since Yang Qindong sent troops to the Japanese Empire, General Ashikaga Yoshimasa felt extremely pressured. Under the instigation of his subordinates, he asked for help from Baiming. After all, the Japanese Empire was still one of the vassal states of the Ming Dynasty, and it was also one of the non-conquering states. Now that they were invaded by the Bugnam of Gojoseon, who was personally appointed by the Emperor of Baiming, it was natural for them to work hard. With the support of Yang Qindong and the financial support of the Baiming Zhu family bank, the Emperor of Baiming, Zhu Qiu, became arrogant. Originally, he was quite afraid that the development of the five-star army was too strong, and he had long suspected that his achievements would overshadow the emperor. However, considering that his financial resources were tight, he had to endure it. However, with the support of the Zhu family bank, Zhu Qiu, whose financial resources had greatly increased in a short period of time, finally decided not to sit and watch the development of the five-star army. After communicating with Zhu Qizhen of the southern Ming dynasty and Yes Hen of the Wala, and everyone's opinions were basically the same, he finally took action. Under Zhu Qiu's order, all the logistics channels of the grassland five-star army were cut off. For a time, the first city and other places became isolated cities. Fortunately, Yang Qindong was already prepared, so it was not a problem to hold on for a while. The first city had been built for several years, and it had always been self-sufficient, so it was not a big problem for it to be suddenly blocked. However, the situation became very difficult for the new Second Army in Jingzhou and Shajing. Not only did the Baiming army cut off the various channels from the outside world to the first city of the grassland, but they also sent troops to besiege Shajing and Jingzhou. Although they restrained themselves and did not send troops to attack without any external help, once the city was besieged for too long, it would collapse sooner or later when they ran out of ammunition and food. As the most important minister that Yang Qindong left in the grassland, Tiger's Mane naturally saw the problem. Worried, he found the city lord, Yu Mian, and the logistics division commander, Yang Si. The three of them sent a telegram at the same time. The general idea was that they were allowed to leave the first city and go to Jingzhou and Shajing to bring the new Second Army back. Yang Qindong had said a long time ago that both the people and the land would exist. With this idea, they wanted to protect the new Second Army. However, such a move would inevitably pass through the area controlled by the Baiming army. If it was not done well, it would cause a big change. Therefore, they asked for instructions from Yang Qindong. Yang Qindong, who sighed in his heart, put down the telegram and closed his eyes to ponder. The great Ming dynasty was still a dynasty with a lot of backbone. Yang Qindong himself did not deny this. It was just that he was too deeply immersed in Confucianism and was used to a comfortable life. It was inevitable that his vision was not long-term enough. Moreover, after Zhu Di, none of the successive monarchs had the intention to expand. It was this period of peace that gave the Western countries a chance to catch up with them. It was precisely because he knew this that Yang Qindong would not let such a thing happen again. He did not want his descendants to blame him. Even if their ideals were not the same, there would be a war sooner or later. However, starting a war now was not what Yang Qindong wanted. Chapter 1109. The war with the Japanese Empire was in a stalemate. If things went wrong, all their previous efforts would be in vain. If the war with Beiming broke out again, not to mention the limited military strength, it was still unknown whether Kikian City's economic system could support two wars. Even so, Yang Qindong still did not regret helping Zhu Qiu establish the Zhu family bank. This was because it was an act of harming the great Ming dynasty's foundation. Even though it was temporary, once there was a problem, it would be the beginning of the collapse of the great Ming dynasty. However, it would take time for that to happen, maybe a few years. Without external help, it might be possible to hold on for decades. Yang Qindong could not place all his hopes on the other side to collapse. However, if he did not wait, did he really have to send troops? Not to mention, the intelligence department had already reported that Beiming, South Ming and Wala had formed a temporary alliance. In terms of military strength, he was at a disadvantage. Even if it was only against Beiming, the five-star army would not be able to win. Tiger's man and the others' worries were reasonable. Fortunately, the new Second Army's commander did not call back to report. This was enough to show that the situation might be very serious, but at least he could hold on. This was the only thing that Yang Qindong was happy about. After all, it was not the right time to start a war with Beiming. He gently put the stun suit aside. Yang Qindong did not return the call or express his stance. It was a sign that Yang Qindong was observing. The most important thing now was to take down Nanhai. As long as the Japanese Empire's navy was completely destroyed, they would be able to control this area. At that time, no news about this place would be leaked. He wanted to see what Zhu Qiu would do in the absence of any news. 5 days after the high-level military meeting, the military operations against Nanhai began one by one. The first to act was the ships of the 4th Division. They suddenly appeared in the waters of Awaju Island and then attacked with artillery, destroying all the ships on the island's dock. Then, the transport ships sailed to the dock and the 60,000 soldiers led by the 1st Reserve Division disembarked. At this point, the attack on Nanhai Road had officially begun. As the main base of the Japanese Naval Division, they rarely participated in their own country's civil war. Their main territory was on the sea, which gave them a great advantage. Especially in this island country, they could almost move to any area on the sea. Whether it was firing artillery from a distance or finding a suitable place to land, they were all good at it. The Japanese Naval Division also became the biggest trump card of Admiral Ashikaga Yoshimasa. Especially the Marine Commander Kuroda, who was personally promoted by him, is a subordinate that he can absolutely rest assured. This is also why he didn't panic when he saw the sudden appearance of the 5-star army. The Emperor of the Garden of Heaven had died. Although the process was somewhat unexpected, and even brought about a very bad influence on Ashikaga Yoshimasa, it had also caught him off guard. But when he thought about how he had gotten rid of a huge mountain that was pressing down on him, everything seemed to be worth it. As long as he could solve the current civil war, then after a short period of pain he could reap the harvest. Especially when he saw that the biggest force opposing him, the flat well field, was slowly retreating under the pressure of his army, and was about to be completely wiped out, Ashikaga Yoshimasa was in a good mood. He even began to imagine how he would take back all the territory that the 5-star army had swallowed after the civil war was resolved, and then make them leave the Japanese Empire with their tails between their legs. He never thought that the 5-star army, in a situation where they were clearly at a disadvantage, would actually dare to suddenly attack Nanhai Road and launch a sudden attack on the flat well-field island. This completely unexpected move really caught Ashikaga Yoshimasa off guard. Baka. King Wunan of Daimyong, you can't keep your word. In the army camp, Ashikaga Yoshimasa was angry. When the commander was angry, the others naturally kept their mouths shut, afraid that the anger would affect them. Among them was the famous Fukada Tani, who had returned after being defeated in Ping in Beijing. At that time, the Grand General had left 30,000 soldiers for him to guard Ping in Beijing. He thought that this was the safest job, and immediately patted his chest and promised that as long as Ping in Beijing was there, he would be there, and as long as Ping in Beijing wasn't there, he would die. Thus, he was praised by Ashikaga Yoshimasa. Then the 5-star army launched a sudden attack. First, it was the artillery bombardment that reduced the number of soldiers in the army to freezing point. Then the first cavalry division's attack began. The terror of this army was still lingering in Fukada Tani's mind. When he thought about how the enemy had attacked the city in just an hour, forcing him to flee in panic, his legs couldn't help but tremble. Then Fukada Tani met up with the main force and came to Ashikaga Yoshimasa's side. At this moment, no one mentioned the military promise from before. As long as the city was there, the people would be there, and the people would die if the city was lost. However, he knew in his heart that the Grand General definitely hadn't forgotten about this. As expected, Ashikaga Yoshimasa, who was angry, started to look at the generals below him. When his gaze moved to the front of Fukada Valley, it stopped moving and slowly came to a stop. Even though he didn't raise his head, he could still feel the burning gaze. Fukada Tani slowly raised his head and saw Ashikaga Yoshimasa's scrutinizing gaze. This scene scared him so much that he almost screamed. Fukada Tani raised his head, and then his face was filled with fear. Ashikaga Yoshimasa didn't care about this, because he had already spoken. Kun Fukada, I'll give you 50,000 soldiers. Can you take back Ping and Beijing? This sentence could be understood as giving you a chance to make up for your mistakes. Do you want to take it or not? The strength of the five-star army had already been proven. Let alone 50,000 soldiers, even if they doubled it by 100,000, so what? He didn't see the Maori regularization who led 100,000 soldiers to attack and defeated and killed the hegemon of the Shanin Road, Uehara Toda, didn't seem to have any intention of moving towards Ping and Beijing. Instead, he went to the Shanin Road. Even this famous general knew to pick on the weak. Fukada Tani was far inferior to this person in all aspects. How could he take back Ping and Beijing? Ping and Beijing was lost in his hands. Now was equivalent to giving him a chance to make up for it. If he refused out of fear, with Ashikaga Yoshimasa's temper, he would probably never be able to make a name for himself. Whether he stretched his neck or retracted his neck, he would be stabbed. At least if he accepted this task, he would be able to live for a few more days. Perhaps he would be able to create a miracle. Helpless, Fukada Tani could only pretend to be full of fighting spirit and say, "General, don't worry. 50,000 soldiers is enough to take back Ping and Beijing." As soon as he said this, the other generals looked at Fukada Tani as if they were looking at an idiot. But then they all closed their mouths. Since this was an impossible task, it was better to act tough than to pretend to be a coward. In fact, not only the others but even Ashikaga Yoshimasa himself knew that with just Fukada Tani and 50,000 soldiers, it was impossible for him to pose a big threat to the five-star army in Ping and Beijing. However, he still did so. Naturally, he had his own reasons for doing so. There was no need for him to tell anyone else. Fukada Tani happily accepted the task. Ashikaga Yoshimasa naturally did not want to make trouble for him. He only said that he had already chosen the 50,000 soldiers for him. The provisions for the army should also be prepared. They could prepare for today and set off tomorrow. Thus the military meeting ended. After the meeting ended, all the colleagues looked at Fukada Tani differently. It was as if they were looking at a dead man. Everyone could imagine that he had already lost Ping and Beijing and failed once. If he failed again this time, of course he would definitely fail. At that time, it would be the end of his life. Fukada Tani, who could see something in everyone's eyes, could do nothing. Who asked him to be targeted by the great general? Now, other than obeying, the only thing left was to obey. He walked out of the tent pessimistically. When he returned to his camp and heard his deputy's report, he almost cursed out loud. It was also from his deputy that he found out that the 50,000 soldiers that the great general gave him were mostly old, weak, sick, and disabled. Almost all of them were captives. They were the spoils of Ashikaga Yoshimasa's campaign. Although being captives did not necessarily mean that they were not capable, it was not wrong to say that they were greedy for life and afraid of death. What was the difference between using such an army to conquer Ping and Beijing, which was occupied by the elite five-star army? "General, we do not have much provisions. It is only enough for 15 days. Although the deputy saw that Fukada Tani's expression was not good, he still had to report some things. Otherwise, he would not be able to do his job properly. 15 days of provisions? Aha! Fukada Tani suddenly found that he was not so angry anymore. On the contrary, he even laughed. Of course, this was not true happiness. It was a kind of sad and bitter laughter because of his uncertain future. It would take at least 8 to 10 days to travel from Yuezhong Prefecture to Ping and Beijing. However, he was only given 15 days of provisions. Didn't that mean that he was only given 5 days to attack? If he failed, there would be no provisions in the army, and it would be impossible for him to retreat safely. It was a mission that he would not be able to return from. Fukada Tani did not understand why the great general made such an arrangement. Was it just because he was not pleasing to the eye? Then why didn't he just give the order to kill him directly? Why was this so? Of course, only Ashikaga Yoshimasa knew the reason. At this time in his tent, the captain of the samurai team, Yamaguchi Fukada, was standing there with a nervous expression. Previously he received the mission to kill Matsumoto Kazuma. Although he did not see the corpse, based on his many years of experience, he thought that his old opponent who had lost too much blood would definitely die. When he returned to the great general, he reported the same thing. But who would have thought that in the end, Matsumoto Kazuma did not die? Instead, he stood up and publicly accused the great general? Chapter 11:10. Yamaguchi Fukada had been nervous about this matter. He didn't know how the Supreme General would punish him. This time he was called to the main tent. He was very nervous, fearing that he would be held accountable for what happened last time. Ashikaga Yoshimasa was somewhat disappointed with Yamaguchi Fukada. He had even sent his own divine archery battalion to him, but he couldn't even kill Matsumoto Kazuma. He even ruined his plan because of this. It was impossible for him not to hate him. Considering that Yamaguchi Fukada's ability was not bad, he didn't punish him. On the contrary, he wanted to give him an opportunity to make a great contribution. Yamaguchi-kun, this time I called you here to give you a special mission. Go to Ping in Beijing to assassinate King Wunan of Damyang. Is there a problem? What? He thought that he would be reprimanded or even punished. Even if he had to suffer some physical pain, it would be normal. He didn't expect that he would be asked to carry out a mission, and the mission was to assassinate King Wunan of Damyang. Looking at Yamaguchi Fukada's surprised expression, Ashikaga Yoshimasa was a little unhappy. His voice was a little low because of this. What? You don't want to go? Yamaguchi Fukada, who finally recovered, first nodded, then realized something. He quickly shook his head and said, I'm willing to go, I'm willing to go. Please rest assured, Supreme General. This time there won't be an accident. I will bring back King Wunan of Damyang's head. It was no wonder that Yamaguchi Fukada was so excited. He was completely different from Fukada Tani. The latter was a general in the army. He paid attention to controlling the overall situation on the battlefield and strategizing. Since he was a martial arts expert, he should be carrying out a special mission. It would be a great waste to throw such a person into the battlefield and fight him openly. It was precisely because of his position that Yamaguchi Fukada knew that his opportunity had come after hearing the Supreme General's mission. If he could complete it well, it would be a matter of fame and fortune. It would also make up for some of his previous mistakes. He wouldn't have to live in fear in the future. Yamaguchi Fukada's excitement was within Ashikaga Yoshimasa's expectations. If samurai were afraid and knew fear, then perhaps the Japanese Empire would really be hopeless. After getting a satisfactory answer, Ashikaga Yoshimasa reached out and patted Yamaguchi Fukada's shoulder. He said very encouragingly, very good. There will be people in Ping and Beijing who will cooperate with you. Fukada Tani's 50,000 soldiers will also attract the enemy's attention and create an opportunity for you to act. Hey Supreme General, please rest assured. If I can't complete the mission this time, Yamaguchi won't come back. He made his own promise. Samurai were not like soldiers. They were true to their words. If they said so, then they would really live and die together with the mission. This made Ashikaga Yoshimasa even more happy. He seemed to have seen the scene of King Wunan of Damyang being killed. At that time, the leaderless five-star army would be nothing in his eyes. On Yang Qindong's side, some information about Ashikaga Yoshimasa had also been sent to him. When he saw that the Supreme General of the Japanese Empire had sent 50,000 soldiers to attack Ping in Beijing, he couldn't help but smile. Did he think that 50,000 soldiers could threaten the safety of Ping in Beijing? The one who had come was Fukada Tani, whom he had defeated before. Yang Qindong really didn't know what to say. Of course he was not a god. He didn't know that a samurai team was secretly coming to Ping in Beijing to take his life. Now he was thinking about how to deal with the 50,000 Japanese army. Ping in Beijing had been occupied, but it wasn't very peaceful. After all, in the eyes of the Japanese Empire, Yang Qindong was an invader. Most of the people could only swallow their anger because of the strength of the five-star army. However, there were still some people who had been resisting. It was just like when they invaded China in the future. Many people resisted in various ways. Although they were called ordinary people, they were nothing in front of the armed soldiers. However, many ants could bite an elephant to death. Therefore, during this period of time, Yang Qindong had been leading the migration of people. Speaking of which, why was there so little resistance when Yang Xie had occupied so many places? It was because of the migration of people. When a person wanted to resist and was suddenly transferred to another place, they would have to face a strange group of people, or even a foreign race that they didn't know. Not to mention joining forces with others to organize a resistance. Whether or not they could do such a thing without being reported was something that they should be on guard against. Correspondingly, the most important thing to do in a foreign land was to find a foothold for oneself, not to think about the country and its people. Everyone was unfamiliar with each other and there was no basic trust between them. In order to live a better life in a foreign land, everyone was thinking of ways to build a solid foundation. At this time, if they could report other people's wrongdoings and gain the attention and rewards of the 5-star army in Yangxia, it would be very beneficial for them to start a new life. People were selfish. After knowing that resistance was useless, the most they would think about was how to adapt to the situation and live a better life. It was with this mentality that the voices of opposition were completely suppressed, and they slowly moved towards a new life. Yang Qindong adopted the same strategy for the Japanese Empire. What he wanted was to break up the Japanese Empire and reorganize it. In the end, he wanted to completely kill some people's thoughts of revenge and resistance. The migration of people in Ping and Beijing was also in progress. However, because this was the capital of the Japanese Empire, there were more than 1.5 million people. It would take time to achieve what he wanted. Ping and Beijing was not stable internally, so it was not suitable for there to be any foreign enemies. Otherwise, it would be tantamount to giving hope to those who already wanted to feel at ease. Once the 1.5 million people of the Japanese Empire all stood up and resisted, the 5-star army would really have to leave here. I can't let Fukada Tani bring the army to Ping and Beijing, even if their strength is average. Yang Qindong said in his heart. Then his brain was working quickly to find a solution. After the blood transfusion, Matsumoto Fuma's physical condition was getting better day by day. After all, he was at the level of a special ninja. As long as he didn't really lose an arm or a leg, there wouldn't be any major problems. Matsumoto Kazuma, who had recovered 90% of his body, began to pay more attention to ninja training and the growth of the ninja team. After experiencing so much, he knew that if he wanted to live and live well, he must have enough strength. Otherwise, he was afraid that he would only become cannon fodder in the eyes of others. With such a belief, and Yang Qindong gave enough money for training funds, the ninja team began to recover step by step and walked on the right track. Matsumoto Kazuma, who was participating in the training, finally had a smile on his face. He seemed to see the hope of the future ninja. At this time, Beta Persei suddenly appeared in the ninja training ground. For this Bugnam of Gojoseon's close aide, Matsumoto Kazuma knew how powerful he was, so he quickly put down the work in his heart and took the initiative to come and greet him. Matsumoto Kazuma, young master wants to see you, come with me. After just glancing at Matsumoto Kazuma, Beta Persei announced the purpose of his visit, then turned and left. The reason why he personally came to announce this task was to see the enthusiasm of the ninja training. Now that he has a general impression, he can go back and report. Knowing that Bugnam of Gojoseon wanted to see him, Matsumoto Kazuma didn't dare to have any neglect. After agreeing, he walked behind Beta Persei. Along the way, he kept saying good things, trying to get some practical information from Beta Persei's mouth. Matsumoto Fujin had done some research on the Han people and knew that they were a nation with human emotions. A lot of things are about human relationships. As a ninja spokesperson, different from those ninjas who only know how to train, Matsumoto Kazuma has some ways to deal with human relationships. But in the face of Beta Persei, all the words are meaningless and even led to a reprimand. Matsumoto Kazuma, I'm warning you for the last time. You'd better do what the young master wants you to do, and don't inquire about things that you shouldn't know. Otherwise you'll be looking for trouble, big trouble. When it comes to big trouble, Beta Persei's voice raised a few notches. Matsumoto Kazuma's forehead was covered in a layer of cold sweat when he saw the serious expression on Matsumoto's face. He repeatedly promised that he would be obedient in the future and wouldn't ask random questions and break the rules of the army. Matsumoto Kazuma, who was scared by Beta Persei, was scared again when he entered Yang Qindong's tent. Matsumoto Kazuma, I'll give you a task. If you complete it well, your ninja training fund will be increased by 50,000 silver. If you don't complete it well, you have to be prepared to lose your life there. The polarization was so serious that Matsumoto Kazuma didn't know what to say, because from beginning to end, he didn't have a choice. Thinking of Beta Persei's warning, he had to pinch his nose and said, "Yes, please give the order to Bugnam of Gojoseon." Well, the task is very clear. Persuade Fukada Tani, who is rushing to Ping in Beijing, to turn to Shanin Road and cooperate with Sensei Naganabu there to deal with Maori regularization. After giving out the task very simply, Yang Qindong sat with his arms crossed and looked at Matsumoto Kazuma, waiting for his answer. Persuade Fukada Tani, this is the way Yang Qindong came up with to deal with Ashikaga Yoshimasa. If the task is done, there will be no war in Ping and Beijing, which is of course very important for the smooth implementation of the migration plan. As for whether it can be done or not, he is not worried, it just depends on whether the price paid is enough. On the contrary, the person to be sent to persuade him gave him a headache. Later, he found out from the resources that Matsumoto Kazuma and Fukada Tani have a good personal relationship. After all, they used to work together in Ping and Beijing. So he decided to give the task to this person. It turned out to be a surrender mission. Shouldn't ninjas carry out assassinations? Matsumoto Kazuma could only think in his heart, but he didn't dare to say it out loud. In his eyes, Yang Qindong was too strong. Not only was he strong, but the 3 special ninjas also said that this person's strength was extremely high, and even the 3 special ninjas were not his opponent. Such a person said such words he didn't dare to refuse, and he couldn't refuse. Yes. Whether unwilling or not, at least at this moment, Matsumoto Kazuma completely agreed. Chapter 11:11. Northern Road, Ruasua County. This was the border between Shanin Road and the Japanese Empire's capital. Ping and Beijing was in the south. They took their time along the way. Originally, they could have finished the journey in 8 to 10 days. However, with Shin Tianya leading the way, they walked for 11 days. When night came, he was in the temporary military tent with a worried face. The provisions that they brought could only last for 4 days. Once this news was spread, the morale of the 50,000 soldiers would be immediately disrupted. At that time, no one dared to imagine what would happen. At this moment, Fukada Tani felt like an abandoned child. He had a home but could not return. He had become a rootless tree. It was already late at night. Outside the tent, only the sound of patrolling soldiers could be heard. Fukada Tani was still standing in front of the map with a worried face. This time they had to deal with the 5-star army. The shadow of the previous failure had not completely dissipated. Thinking of the power of the cannons and the bravery of the cavalry, he did not even have a 10% chance of winning. Although Ashikaga Yoshimasa had told him that the 5-star army had already attacked Nanhai Road, there should not be many soldiers left in Ping and Beijing. However, Fukada Tani did not think this way. King Wunan of Daimyeong was in Ping and Beijing. How could he not leave some elite soldiers by his side? Not to mention other things, just leaving some firearms behind would be enough to stop them from advancing. It was true that there were 50,000 soldiers, but he knew better than anyone else what kind of quality they were. If they were fighting a smooth battle, they might have some skills. However, once they met a strong enemy, these people would probably run away. Such a strong opponent was actually sent to fight, and only 50,000 weak soldiers. This made Fukada Tani want to curse. He suspected that this was Ashikaga Yoshimasa's plan to kill with a borrowed knife. Everything was because he lost Ping and Beijing as well as a large amount of gold, silver, and provisions. But who could be blamed for all this? He believed that even if the great general had been in Ping and Beijing, he would have chosen to avoid him. Thinking of this, Fukada Tani couldn't help but sigh helplessly. What made Kuin Fukada so worried in the middle of the night? The voice that suddenly sounded from within the large tent seemed so out of place in the silent night, yet it was also so clear that it could be heard. In an instant, Fukada Tani felt goosebumps all over his body. Out of instinct, he couldn't help but yell, "Who is it? Is it a human or a ghost?" Seeing Fukada Tani's big reaction, a person walked out from a corner of the tent and said with a smile, "Kuin Fukada, don't be nervous. An old friend has come to see you." Borrowing the dim candlelight in the tent, Fukada Tani was finally able to clearly see the person who had arrived. He then said, "So it's Kuin Matsumoto. Aren't you? Seeing that Fukada Tani had finally reacted, Matsumoto Kazuma laughed and came to less than 2 meters in front of him. He said, "Yes, I've already defected to the 5-star army, but we're still friends, aren't we? We had the same experience. We were both abandoned by Ashikaga Yoshimasa, weren't we?" Matsumoto Kazuma's entry point was very good. He found the same experience that both of them had. Back then he was also one of the people that the great general valued the most. However, when he didn't complete his mission well, he was met with a bloody massacre. If it wasn't for the 5-star army saving him, he would have already been a dead man. Fukada Tani was the same. As a former famous person, he wasn't a nobody. Because he held a portion of the military power, he was also one of the people that the great general roped in. However, after the death of the emperor, the great general's strength grew again and again. His strength was no longer in the great general's eyes. Especially after losing Ping in Beijing, he didn't have a good day. He was always in fear and didn't know when the great general would come to find trouble with him. Now it was even better. He brought 50,000 weak soldiers to battle. What he had to face was the 5-star army, which was known as the strongest in the world. This was clearly an act of seeking death. It wasn't an exaggeration to say that he was an abandoned child. On the contrary, it was very appropriate. In a way, the two of them were both abandoned children. In the past, they were very familiar with each other. Now that they had the same experience and met again, they had a lot of feelings and even a sense of identity. This was one of the reasons why Yang Qindong sent Matsumoto Kazuma to carry out the mission. Two people who had the same experience would always have more things to talk about. Not to mention, with Matsumoto Kazuma's ability, once things went wrong, it wouldn't be easy to make him stay. This gave the matter a 30% chance of success. When others said that he was an abandoned child, Fukada Tani would more or less defend himself. It was also possible that he would accuse the other party of slander. If it was Matsumoto Kazuma who said this, he wouldn't have any doubts. Everyone was too familiar with each other. There were some things that really didn't need to be explained. Another sigh came from Fukada Tani's mouth. He didn't expect that the two of them would meet in such a situation. Moreover, they were both abandoned children. The past could only be recalled and reminisced. People still had to face reality. After all, Fukada Tani was a famous person. He had some strategies. He quickly threw away the unhappiness in his heart and said, "Kun Matsumoto, you came here in the middle of the night. Presumably you want to kill me. It's fine. Dying in the hands of an old friend isn't a regrettable thing. I just have to trouble you to make your move quickly and let me suffer less." The two of them didn't have the same standpoint. They were no longer friends and had become enemies. They also knew Matsumoto Kazuma's ability. It was impossible to resist. Fukada Tani simply accepted his fate. After he finished speaking, he closed his eyes and looked like he was waiting for death. Fukada Tani didn't even resist. This was somewhat out of Matsumoto Kazuma's expectations. However, when he thought about how even if he didn't kill him, when faced with the powerful 5-star army, there wouldn't be much of an outcome, he felt relieved. It was just that this time he didn't come to kill, so he deliberately pretended to be surprised and asked, "Kun Fukada, why do you say that? We are friends. How could I come to kill you?" "You didn't come to kill me?" Fukada Tani opened his eyes at this moment. In fact, when Matsumoto Kazuma appeared and didn't immediately attack him, he could feel that the other party didn't really want to kill him. Otherwise he could have just attacked directly. Just now he was just putting on an act to show that even if he died, he wouldn't call for people to attack his former friend. Of course, as a friend, not only will I not harm Kun Fukada, but I will also save you this time. Since he said this, Matsumoto Kazuma didn't hesitate. He told him that King Wunan of Damyang originally wanted to kill him, but after he found out, he pleaded for mercy and said that he would personally go and persuade him. At the same time, he also told him that he would give Fukada Tani a way out. According to Matsumoto Kazuma's words, Fukada Tani was still a very capable person. This kind of person shouldn't be abandoned and die as cannon fodder. He should display his value. So he came. Fukada Tani naturally wouldn't believe Matsumoto Kazuma's words so easily. He even suspected that this was King Wunan of Damyang's intention. However, there was no point in dwelling on this now. The most important thing was to know that he was still useful and didn't have to die. This was the most important thing. Immediately, he pretended to be very grateful and said, "Kun Matsumoto is very considerate, but I don't know what King Wunan of Damyang wants me to do." Matsumoto Kazuma, who had prepared a lot of things to say, didn't expect things to go so smoothly. This made him a little surprised. But after all, it was a good thing. He immediately said, "Bugnam of Gojoseon hopes that Kun Fukada can repent and be saved. In the current situation, it's only a matter of time before Ashikaga Yoshimasa is destroyed. What we need to do is to make the right choice in life. For example, we need to rely on Bugnam of Gojoseon and the 5-star army. Will they accept us?" Kun Fukada asked without hesitation. He wasn't playing any tricks. With his current status, he really didn't have any other choice. Since the Grand General had already abandoned him, he might as well save himself. Although his future was still uncertain, at least he could live for a few more days, right? Of course they will. I have already convinced Bugnam of Gojosian, and Bugnam of Gojosian also said that as long as Kun Fukada can show enough sincerity, the 5-star army is willing to accept you. When the time comes, high positions and generous salaries will be waiting for us in front of us. Matsumoto Kazuma seemed to be getting more and more excited as he spoke. It was as if everything would go smoothly if they relied on Yang Qindong. Really? That's great. Fukada Tani also said very cooperatively, but then the excitement on his face disappeared. But Kun Matsumoto, I'm afraid that you don't know my current situation. Right now, my rations can only last for 4 days. Once I don't have enough rations, I'm afraid that there will be a mutiny in the army. At that time, even if I want to rely on the 5-star army, I'm afraid that I won't have the strength and time to do so. That was a condition he was proposing. Since they were going to surrender, they should at least get something in return. Otherwise, why would they listen to their commands and work for them? A 50,000 army only had 4 days of rations. This was the first time Matsumoto Kazuma heard of this. But it didn't matter. Before he came, Yang Qindong had given him a lot of support. So after hearing this, he didn't panic too much. Instead, he laughed and said, Kun Fukada doesn't need to be so distressed. If you don't have rations, we can buy them. Oh right, this time, Bugnam of Gojosian, in order to welcome Kun Fukada, specially asked me to bring 500,000 taels of silver. It is now in a forest 10 miles away from the camp. If you need it, you can go and get it at any time. The Dafei kingdom was finally destroyed, and the silver mine on the island was also taken by Yang Xie. This greatly reduced the need for silver. With money, Yang Qindong naturally had more confidence. What he used to do against the Japanese Empire was to use money to pave the way. This was to preserve his strength to the greatest extent. Chapter 11-12. When Fukada Tani heard that he had to spend money to buy food, he wanted to laugh coldly. If there really was money, then what else could he say? However, before he could complain, he heard the words 500,000 taels of silver. He immediately froze on the spot. Then he widened his eyes and asked in disbelief, 500,000 taels of silver? Is this true? It was no wonder that Fukada Tani was so excited. At this time, the money used in the Japanese Empire was mostly Yongle Tongbao. The Yongle Tongbao coins with the words Ji and Mu on them were all made by the Japanese Empire. After Ashikaga Yoshimasa took control of the currency, he began to reform it. The copper used in the currency was almost completely gone, replaced by other things. The Yongle Tongbao coins were originally one of the most exquisite currencies in China's history. However, the Yongle Tongbao coins that appeared in the Japanese Empire were extremely crude and had no value. They no longer had any purchasing power, and even the commoners didn't recognize them. Since the commoners didn't recognize them, there was almost no use for them. The most hateful thing was that the money that Ashikaga Yoshimasa gave to the generals was still the same. This was equivalent to letting the horse run and not letting the horse eat grass. However, it was precisely because he had no money and no food that he was able to control the various armies and make them work for him. Currently, Fukada Tani had a large amount of crude and worthless Yongle Tongbao coins in his hands. If the commoners didn't recognize them, how could they buy food? This was one of the reasons why he was worried. However, now that he heard that there was 500,000 taels of silver, it was no wonder that his eyes lit up. All of Fukada Tani's actions were seen by Matsumoto Kazuma. He immediately said, "Of course it's true. Why would I lie about such an important matter? If you don't believe me, we can go to the forest 10 li away and get the money." Okay. Fukada Tani didn't try to hide anything. In his opinion, nothing was more important than money. Silver was only silver when it was held in one's hands. Immediately, Fukada Tani sent someone to summon his own guards. A group of over 100 people left the camp in the middle of the night and headed straight for the forest 10 li away. Fukada Tani trusted Matsumoto Kazuma so much because he knew that if Matsumoto Kazuma wanted to kill him, there was no need to beat around the bush. If Matsumoto Kazuma wanted to kill him, he could have killed him just now. The truth did not disappoint him. Sure enough, he found 10 large chests, each of which contained 50,000 taels of silver. After checking, Fukada Tani was naturally satisfied. Together with Matsumoto Kazuma and the guards, they carried the 10 large boxes back to the barracks. When they returned, it was already dawn. Many soldiers had already left their tents and were preparing to eat breakfast. Coincidentally, one of the chests had been knocked over on the ground. When the dazzling silver fell to the ground, it immediately attracted a lot of attention. Soon after, the news spread and Fukata Tani's 500,000 taels of silver was known by everyone. When they returned to the main tent, Fukata Tani had already changed from his previous dispirited state to that of excitement and excitement. What Matsumoto Kazuma said next made him even more excited. "Kun Fukata, I have a plan that can save us 500,000 taels of silver and get enough food. But I don't know if I have the guts to do it." "What plan?" With 500,000 taels of silver in front of him, Fukata Tani no longer had any doubts about Matsumoto Kazuma. He immediately asked eagerly. Knowing that the time was right, Matsumoto Kazuma did not intend to keep him in suspense. He immediately spoke of his idea. It was very simple. It was to snatch food. Snatching food was a common thing for rebel armies. But to Fukata Tani, who had 50,000 soldiers, it would be very difficult to gather enough food by snatching food from the commoners. This was because the commoners would not foolishly leave their food at home. Instead, they would hide it. Moreover, without enough accurate information, not only would they not be able to snatch enough food, it was very likely that they would anger the commoners and lead to a chaotic battle, damaging their own strength. Thus, this was not something that an ordinary army would be willing to do. However, if they were to snatch food from other armies, the effect would be completely different. Since they were both armies, their food would naturally be gathered together. There would be no need to search everywhere, and they would be able to gather large amounts of food to solve their urgent needs. Matsumoto Kazuma's idea of snatching food was to snatch food from other armies. After he spoke of his idea, Fukata Tani nodded continuously until he finally laughed out loud. After an hour, the various junior generals who were waiting outside the main tent were finally allowed to enter. Previously, these junior generals looked down on Fukata Tani. Some of them had even thought about where they would run to once the war started. But now, with the temptation of 500,000 taels of silver, everyone's mentality had completely changed. Money could make the world go round, let alone ordinary people. Fukata Tani was also watching everyone who entered the tent. When he saw that their mental state had completely changed and many of them even looked at him with flattering eyes, he was indescribably happy. At this moment he finally felt like he was in charge of an army. After waiting for all the junior generals to enter the tent, Fukata Tani, who was sitting at the head of the table, finally opened his mouth and said, "All right, since everyone is here, then there are some things that I can tell you directly. We are a deserted army, everyone knows that, right?" How could everyone not know about this matter? Because of this, everyone couldn't help but nod their heads. However, there were some who didn't understand why the general would suddenly say such words. What was his intention? What we are going to face next is the 5-star army, an army that has the advantage of powerful firearms. Everyone knows that, right? In exchange, everyone still nodded their heads. They were even more confused about Fukata Tani's intention. Facing such an opponent, we are equivalent to sending ourselves to death. Does anyone have any objections? Still, everyone nodded their heads in unison. Therefore, Fukata Tani revealed his true intention. Since we know that we are going to die, then as the commander, how can I watch everyone die? Therefore, I have decided that we will not attack Ping and Beijing. We will turn to the Shanin Road and attack the Maori regularization. The grain in his hands will be our target this time. That's right, this was the idea that Matsumoto Kazuma gave to Fukata Tani. The so-called snatching of grain was to snatch the grain of the Maori regularization's 100,000 soldiers that were heading to the Shanin Road. Similarly, the Maori regularization was under the command of the great general. Not only were the soldiers composed of young adults, but their grain was also very abundant. If they could snatch their grain, then it would definitely solve the problem of their own grain being depleted. At the same time, it was tantamount to showing loyalty to Bugnam of Gojoseon and making a contribution. It could be said that the 500,000 taels of silver were not taken for nothing. It could also be said that they had found a way out for themselves in the future. Fukata Tani's decision was heard by everyone. Naturally, they were very surprised. They also knew that the grain in the army could only last for 4 days. If they did not snatch the grain, they would not be able to survive. While everyone was still digesting this decision, Fukata Tani said something shocking again. He would take out 100,000 taels of silver as a reward for the army that performed the best in this battle. As soon as this was said, it immediately attracted everyone's interest. 100,000 taels of silver for the Japanese army leaders who were used to hardship, it was definitely a large amount. For this, they were willing to give it a try. With the silver as a reward, this military meeting was very successful. Even in the main tent, the young generals were fighting over who would be the vanguard. In the end, it was Fukada Tani who made the decision that there was no priority for this battle. Whoever could snatch the most grain and bring it back would be the biggest winner and would be able to receive the 100,000 taels of silver as a reward. This was good. When the meeting was over, many of the young generals either secretly joined forces to increase their own strength or wanted to act alone and take all the food for themselves. There were even more who began to lead the troops as soon as they returned to their tents. It was as if they were afraid that if they were a step late, they would not be able to get any benefits. People say that interest is the best teacher. When a person wholeheartedly wanted to do something, there was nothing that could not be done or not done well. When everyone's initiative was completely aroused, the power that could be displayed was also amazing. 3 days later, Maori Regularization, who was leading the main army towards Shanin Road and had continuously defeated Sensei Naganabu's army several times, suddenly received bad news. The grain of the rear army had been stolen by Fukada Tani's 50,000 weak troops. How is this possible? When he first heard the news, Maori Regularization's face was full of disbelief. He did not believe that this army that was about to be abandoned still had such ability. Not only did they dare to make a move against him, but they could also really achieve their goal. However, no matter how much he did not believe it, the facts were right there. The news of the grain being stolen came one after another. There was even news of casualties. It was said that Fukada Tani's 50,000 weak troops were as if they had been injected with chicken blood. They displayed 120% of their strength and relied on numbers to defeat the elite Japanese army that was protecting the grain. In particular, these weak troops did not play by the rules at all. When they appeared, they swarmed like bees. When they attacked, they did not differentiate between the primary and secondary. It was completely chaotic. This made it so that even if one wanted to defend, they did not know how to defend. In any case, the grain being stolen and the loss of more than 3,000 soldiers was an irrefutable fact. Faced with the loss of the grain, Maori Regularization had no choice but to suppress the decision to continue attacking Sensei Naganabu. He turned around and retreated. While reuniting with the rear army, he asked the Supreme General for help in grain. Fukada Tani's sudden attack had caught Ashikaga Yoshimasa off guard. Originally, this was a gift that he had prepared for Ping and Beijing. He did not expect that he would shoot himself in the foot. This made him so depressed that he wanted to vomit blood. If it wasn't for the fact that the destruction of the flat well field was right in front of him, he would have led his army back and killed Fukada Tani. Chapter 11-13. When the news came, Yang Qindong breathed a sigh of relief. With the addition of this chaotic army, it was enough to make Ashikaga Yoshimasa suffer. Taking this opportunity, he turned his attention to the Battle of Nanhai Province. The attack on Ge Prefecture, which was close to Ping and Beijing, had already begun. With the new army commander Su He taking the lead, they were naturally victorious. Yang Qindong didn't need to worry about anything. He was more concerned about the Battle of Awaju Island and the reaction of the more than 300,000 Japanese naval division in Nanhai Province. Yang Qindong had set a 20-word policy for Nanhai Province's attack. The cavalry would attack the Vietnamese line, the navy would attack Awaju Island, the two sectors would be scorched earth, and Nanhai Province would be surrounded but not attacked. The first two sentences had already been completed, and the third sentence was also implemented in Shanin Province and Nanhai Province, which were adjacent to Nanhai Province. They would ensure that no civilians or grain would be seen within 50 li of the coast. The isolation of Nanhai Province's Japanese naval division was already very obvious. And if the Japanese army dared to enter within 50 li of the coast, the elite forces of the Cold Front, the extremely fast Cold 4th Division riding bicycles would teach them a lesson. After all, the Japanese Empire's territory was still a bit small. The good thing was that it wasn't that difficult to defend. If it was the Great Ming Dynasty's coastline, not to mention one Cold Front Division, even two Cold Front Divisions would be far from enough. The scorched earth work was completed. Next, it was time to see how long the Japanese army in Nanhai Province could last. Once the time was right, the C4th Division and C5th Division guarding this area would immediately launch an attack and take their lives. Of course, to achieve this result, it was far from something that could be done overnight. Right now, the main task was to attack Awaju Island. If they could successfully occupy this island, not only would they be able to completely isolate the Japanese naval division in Nanhai Province, but they would also be able to withdraw most of their forces to attack Ji Prefecture. Thus, they could achieve the goal of ensuring the safety of Ping and Beijing. On Awaju Island, under the gaze of Yang Qindong, the commander of the 1st Division, Su Kuda, who was in charge of leading the troops, also tried his best to perform. 30 to 50,000 veterans were already a very powerful force to begin with. In addition, they had the support of the cavalry division of the new 3 armies, as well as the support of the 3 divisions. After they had landed on the Korean Navy's transport ships, they were able to display a very powerful force. The 50,000 Japanese soldiers were completely caught off guard and were forced to retreat again and again. Getting a good start didn't mean getting the final victory. On the battlefield, there were many examples of people who won first and then lost. Relying on their understanding of the terrain as well as the rapid recruitment of new soldiers from the common people, the Japanese army on Awaji Island went from retreating step by step to standing on equal footing with the 5-star army. This was within Yang Qindong's expectations. According to the intelligence analysis of the Security Bureau and the CIA, the Navy was one of the most capable forces in the Japanese Empire. Perhaps they were rarely involved in civil wars, allowing them to maintain a detached attitude. Because of this, they had more time to train. If it weren't for the fact that their weapons and equipment were far inferior, even the 5-star army's navy wouldn't be able to gain any advantage over them. How could such an army be annihilated so easily? It was normal for them to be in a stalemate. Yang Qindong also knew that such a situation would not last long. After all, Awadai Island was now an isolated island. Without any reinforcements, it was only a matter of time before their morale crumbled. That would be the end of their army. Everything was within his expectations, and Yang Qindong's originally nervous heart relaxed a lot. This could be seen from the fact that he had been coming out of the palace recently. Instead of staying in the palace, Yang Qindong had to walk around. He wanted to see the situation in Neon from his own perspective, especially the life of the people at the bottom. He wanted to know what they needed and what they hoped for. After understanding all this, he knew what to do to completely solve the problem here. Yang Qindong didn't know that everything he did was being watched by someone. It was the intelligence personnel left behind by the general's forces in Ping and Beijing. They received the latest order to keep a close eye on King Wunan of Damyang's every move. If this person stayed in the palace, they had to know the situation of the palace's defense and the time of the guard's shift change. From this point of view, in order to kill Yang Qindong, Ashikaga Yoshimasa must have been prepared to storm the palace. What the intelligence personnel left behind didn't expect was that the King Wunan of Damyang actually took the initiative to come out. Although there were many guards accompanying him, more than 200 each time, it was not as safe as staying in the palace. A few days later, Yamaguchi Fukada, the general's favorite, the captain of the samurai team, appeared. This also indicated that it was time to start the assassination plan against Yang Qindong. There were also 600 elite samurai with Yamaguchi Fukada. This was also thanks to Yang Qindong's policy towards the Japanese Empire. Since Ping and Beijing was occupied by him, except for the first half of the month when the city gate was closed and people were arrested and searched for, the rest of the time the city gate was opened wide, as if it was welcoming guests from all over the world. There were even immigration counters on the streets of Ping and Beijing. The general idea was to give the people of the Japanese Empire who wanted to be safe and live an ordinary life a way out. After all, the Japanese Empire was in internal strife, and the people who suffered the most would always be the people. Unlike those ambitious warlords, many people were still willing to live on the land in front of them. Once the immigration counters were opened, a large number of people signed up every day. Many of them had heard the news and came from nearby cities, or even farther places. The 600 elite samurai were mixed in with these people. They were dressed like ordinary people and sneaked into Ping and Beijing. It was so easy to enter Ping and Beijing, which made Yamaguchi Fukada more confident about the completion of this mission. He had brought 600 elite samurai, which was almost all of his strength. It was not impossible for him to storm the palace if he was prepared, not to mention assassinating Yang Qindong outside the palace. He was full of confidence. Fukada Tani, who was originally attacking Ping and Beijing, had taken the Maori regularization's ass. Yang Qindong seemed to have completely forgotten about the so-called safety. Every day after breakfast he would start to visit the streets. These days he even directly left Kyoto and began to wander in the nearby mountains and forests. He gave people the feeling that he was on a scenic tour, but he did not bring Princess Junko with him, which inevitably made people suspicious. Some intelligence personnel of the Japanese Empire thought that King Wunan of Daimyong was waiting for something, and that he should have known that someone was going to assassinate him. Regarding this, Yamaguchi Fukada naturally had a face full of disbelief. The assassination of Yang Qindong was extremely secret. Even the 600 samurai under his command only knew that they were going to carry out the mission, but they did not know the details of the mission. How could King Wunan of Daimyong know? It was clear that these people were scaring themselves and were scared by Yang Qindong. Yamaguchi Fukada had decided to act alone. With 600 samurai, even if they were prepared, what could they do? They could even kill him with a crowd of people. Speaking of which, Yang Qindong was not doing any seductive actions, nor was he setting up a trap for people to fall into. The reason why he had been wandering around the nearby mountains was because of the underground mines. The Japanese Empire was an island country. Due to the geological structure and volcanic rocks, there were very few mountains. However, in these mountains there were relatively large reserves of coal, limestone, sulfur, copper, bismuth, and other minerals. The main reason why he appeared near Ping and Beijing was not because of these, but because he knew that there was a silver mountain nearby. This was also the main reason why the Japanese Empire was able to develop in the later period. He came to find the exact location of this place. Speaking of which, he still had to thank Yang Qindong for his previous life. When he was carrying out a mission here under the name of Yang Dong, he happened to hear from a local old man that there used to be a silver mountain here hundreds of years ago. The silver content was very high and very pure. That was God's longing for the people of the Japanese Empire. In fact, he was a little curious, so he asked some people and confirmed the authenticity of this matter. Now that he had returned to hundreds of years ago and came to this place, how could he let go of the silver mountain? Yang Xie's development was too fast. His own ability to produce blood was not bad, but he still felt a little stretched. Although he found a few silver mountains on the island of the Great F country, it had greatly alleviated all kinds of economic pressure. But then again, who would complain about having too much money? These days, Yang Qindong suddenly thought of this matter. Every day, he wandered around the nearby mountains to determine which mountain was his target. After a few days of hard work, he finally determined that his final target was the 3 mountains in front of him. Later, as long as he sent people to dig and develop, there would be a surprise waiting for him. After many days of hard work, there was finally a good result. Yang Qindong could not help but breathe a sigh of relief. Then, from a distance behind him, there were sounds of fighting and yelling. Then Beta Persei talked to a Long Wei who ran from afar for a while, then returned to Yang Qindong's side and said, "Young master, someone wanted to assassinate you, but was discovered by Long Wei outside and suppressed with the 95 style. Want to kill me?" Yang Qindong was stunned when he heard this, then he smiled. He now appeared as an invader. Although it was for the sake of the 8th Madam Princess Junko, it also broke the original balance here. It was normal for someone to want to kill him. Since they could force Long Wei to use the 95 style, needless to say, the other party's background was not small. All kinds of thoughts flashed through his mind. Yang Qindong asked again, "Do you know who came?" Chapter 11-14. I'll send someone to check it out. Beta Persei turned around and left. After a while, he took the 2 Long Wei soldiers and ran towards the direction where the gunshots came from. In that direction, Yamaguchi Fukada was smashing the ground with his fist. Some stones were smashed to pieces under the huge force, but he didn't seem to feel it at all. Samurai are different from ninjas. They can use the things around them, plus their own flexibility and speed, etc., to hide their body and achieve the effect of approaching the target at the closest distance. This way they are better at assassination. In contrast, samurai's combat power is more powerful, but they are only strong in normal combat power. Every time they want to get close to the target, they have to make some big noise. Just like now, as soon as they made their decision, they were spotted by the dragon guards who were in charge of the outer perimeter security. After a failed warning, the dragon guards immediately opened fire. The dozens of warriors who were charging at the front were shot dead on the ground amidst the battle cries. The distance was at least 300 meters. The death of the samurai frightened Yamaguchi Fukada. He was forced to let the other samurai lie on the ground and try not to expose his body as much as possible. But at the same time he was furious. This kind of opponent that he couldn't reach at all made him feel powerless. Under such a feeling, how could he be in a good mood? "Captain, let's retreat. The guns in their hands are too powerful and they can fire continuously. If we rush up, we will only die." A samurai captain, who is also Yamaguchi Fukada's trusted aide, crawled to his side and said, "Should we retreat?" Yamaguchi Fukada was unwilling. This time their appearance was so sudden, but they couldn't get close to the target. They didn't even see Yang Qindong's true appearance. If they give up such an opportunity, it can be imagined that it will be even more difficult to assassinate him in the future. But if they don't retreat now, what's the difference between lying here and waiting for death? Once more time passed and more 5-star soldiers appeared, wouldn't it be impossible for him to retreat even if he wanted to? For the sake of his subordinates' safety, Yamaguchi Fukada finally made the decision to retreat and look for an opportunity. At this moment he realized that the 5-star army had started to retreat. What's going on? Yamaguchi Fukada was puzzled at first, but then he thought of something and laughed. I know, it must be because the other party's guns are out of gunpowder or they are running out of gunpowder. Otherwise, why would they retreat when they have the upper hand? Yamaguchi Fukada, who felt that he knew the truth, was filled with energy again. After a loud shout, he ordered his warriors to get up and charge forward. However, for the sake of safety, only a few dozen warriors stood up this time. They were also guarding against the enemy's muskets and didn't want to suffer too many losses. The few dozen warriors stood up and waved their katanas as they charged forward. The 5-star army on the other side was indeed only retreating. They only occasionally fired a shot or two, but they were far less concentrated and confident than before. Yamaguchi Fukada saw all of this and was very excited. With loud shouts, the warriors under his command all stood up and charged forward in a frenzy. Yang Qindong was standing in an open space at the foot of the mountain. On his left and right were 100 Longwei soldiers. At this moment, they were all holding the 95 style in their hands and stood proudly. In front of them, the 50 Longwei soldiers who were in charge of the periphery were quickly retreating. When they retreated to Yang Qindong's side, the person in charge, Pengyu, laughed and took the initiative to say, "Sixth young master, the mission to lure the enemy has been successfully completed." Very good. Yang Qindong nodded with a smirk on his face. Of course, the retreat this time was not caused by a lack of bullets. After the assassination in Baiming's Kyoto Yongding Gate, the Longwei soldiers were fully equipped with bullets when they went out with Yang Qindong. 200 people could easily deal with an enemy 10 times their number, not to mention that this time they were facing an enemy 3 times their number. How could they not have enough bullets? However, he still made a move to retreat in order to eliminate all of them. Once they escaped and returned to Pinyin City, they would be the biggest threat to his safety. Yamaguchi Fukada didn't know that when he saw that the enemy only had a few hundred people, which was a quarter of his forces, he couldn't help but want to look up to the sky and sigh. This was an opportunity given to them by the heavens. When the distance between the two sides was only 200 meters, Yamaguchi Fukada led the samurais closer step by step with a determined look on his face. Their speed was very fast. 180 meters, 150 meters. Soon it was 120 meters. At this distance, those who had some strength could shoot with a strong bow. Finally, the Longwei soldiers raised their lowered muzzles one by one. With Beta Persei's order, bursts of fire spewed out from the muzzles and fell on the samurais opposite them one by one, forming little blood flowers. These were blood flowers, not snowflakes. With the appearance and production of these blood flowers, the samurais fell one after another in the process of charging. After several waves of attack, there were less than 200 people left in the team of nearly 600 people. Such a fast death rate made Yamaguchi Fukada's heart bleed after seeing it. This was the result of many years of hard work to train these 600 elites, but now they died one by one without even touching the opponent's clothes or seeing the opponent's appearance clearly. This result was unacceptable. You guys retreat, the rest of you charge with me. In order to leave a seed of hope for the samurais, Yamaguchi Fukada gritted his teeth and issued an order, forcing a team of 50 people to retreat, while he himself still resolutely rushed forward. Even if he was going to die, he wanted to die while charging forward. This was the only way to not disgrace the spirit of the samurai. But what happened next made Yamaguchi Fukada have the urge to vomit blood again. Just behind them, when the 50 samurais that he regarded as seeds turned around, 50 Longwei members suddenly appeared behind them. These 50 people came in a roundabout way after the battle started, with the idea of completely wiping out the enemy. Under the leadership of Yamaguchi Fukada, the 50 people fired their guns as if they were practicing shooting. The difference was that they were shooting at targets during training, but now they were shooting at real enemies. 50 against 50, the battle ended very quickly. After hearing the gunshots and turning his head, Yamaguchi Fukada saw the scene of all the retreating members dying. At this time there were less than 10 samurais standing beside him, and this was because the Longwei members showed mercy and did not continue to use them as targets. Otherwise none of them would have survived. At this moment the distance between the two sides was less than 80 meters. At a distance of 80 meters, the 95 style still had the advantage and completely controlled the situation. Beta Persei finally said, "You guys, surrender." Beta Persei shouted this sentence in Japanese. Although it was a little awkward, it was enough for the other party to understand what he said. Surrender? Yamaguchi Fukada's crazy face was constantly twisted. There was nothing more humiliating than surrendering to a samurai. Ninjas could surrender but samurais could not. This had a lot to do with the requirements of their daily training and education. At this moment Yamaguchi Fukada first shook his head, then shouted with all his strength, "I've heard that the 5-star Army's warriors are all good at fighting, but I don't know if you dare to fight with us in close combat and let us see your methods and abilities." This kind of scene often happened in later generations of TV dramas. Often, when the villain said this sentence, the omnipotent main character would appear. He would either hold a large sword or a red spear and go into battle alone. With just a few answers he would be able to kill several Woka pirates. It was a very satisfying scene. But that was just a TV effect. In reality no one would do that. Was it fun to take the risk? Moreover, when the pirates were surrounded by Han people, how many of them would choose to fight you one-on-one? Wouldn't they swarm you or shoot you to end your opponent's life? Idiot. Listening to Yamaguchi Fukada's challenge, Yang Qindong slightly opened his mouth and spat out these two words. Beta Persei, who had been by his side for a long time, already knew what kind of personality the young master had. He also smiled. This idiot in his ears was like an order to open fire. He first raised his right arm high, then quickly lowered it, bringing with it a burst of gunfire. Poor Yamaguchi Fukada, in the end, didn't even touch the corner of a Longwei's clothes. He was shot several times and died. Even when he died, his eyes were still wide open as if he died with a grievance. After the investigation, a total of 603 corpses were found, including 2 intelligence personnel from the Japanese Empire. Yang Qindong casually ordered people to dig a big hole and bury them. Ashikaga Yoshimasa was a very sharp knife in his eyes. In the eyes of many people in the Japanese Empire, they represented a very powerful existence. They were not in Yang Qindong's eyes at all. They were just countless assassins who wanted to kill him, but in the end they were killed instead. Yang Qindong really didn't have the slightest interest in them. Because this incident happened outside the city, it didn't attract any attention. Only some high-level members of the 5-star army knew about it. Matsumoto Kazuma, who had just returned from the Shanin Road, was fortunate enough to know about this news. His face was full of shock and stupefaction. For a long time, ninjas and samurai were like 2 life-and-death enemies. They became the 2 sharp swords in the hands of Supreme General Ashikaga Yoshimasa. No one could stop them as long as they pointed at them. Chapter 11:15. But now, the ninjas surrendered to the 5-star army, and all the samurai were killed. This result shocked Matsumoto Kazuma, but it also strengthened his determination to be loyal to Yang Qindong. This master was too powerful, so powerful that even a little bit of resistance was a sin. In the face of such a person, it was best to be obedient. Perhaps the ninjas could be carried forward under his leadership. As for his old enemy Yamaguchi Fukada, he died without a trace. He couldn't say whether he was happy or disappointed. Because anyone who became an enemy of Yang Qindong would end up like this. The only difference was that it was sooner or later. Matsumoto Kazuma didn't feel anything. Yang Qindong wasn't a person who didn't fight back. Although Yamaguchi Fukada's appearance didn't threaten his safety, it didn't even have the qualifications to be scared. But this person was sent by Ashikaga Yoshimasa to assassinate him. Just based on this he must return the favor. Matsumoto Kazuma was once again ordered to come to the Imperial Palace, and received a mission here to assassinate Ashikaga Yoshimasa. According to Yang Qindong, Ashikaga Yoshimasa was the most powerful general in the Japanese Empire. He had once forced the emperor to a dead end. He must be heavily guarded and it wouldn't be easy to kill him. But it didn't matter. Even if he couldn't kill him he still needed to scare him. If he couldn't kill him, then he would kill some people who were close to him. As for who these people were, presumably Matsumoto Kazuma, who had been important by his side, would be very clear. 20 heads. If we can't kill Ashikaga Yoshimasa, then we'll take the heads of 20 of his trusted subordinates. I want to let people know that if they want to kill me, they will have to pay a heavy price. 110 is not enough, 120 is barely enough. This was Yang Qindong's original words to Matsumoto Kazuma. Matsumoto Kazuma, who had completely surrendered, not only didn't have the slightest difficulty, but also used this mission as an opportunity to show off his achievements and prove his strength. He personally led Suzuki, 10 jonin and 30 chunin to send out the mission, proving their determination to complete this mission. Yang Qindong, who sent out this mission, turned his head as if nothing had happened. He sent a report to Yu Qian, asking him to arrange mining personnel to come to the Japanese Empire. Then he focused his attention on the campaign to conquer Nankado. The war in the Jiu-E prefecture was as difficult as he expected. The soldiers and civilians of the Japanese Empire on the island resisted with all their strength. As an important stronghold of the Japanese Naval Division, the people here lived a good life. They were rarely affected by the war. After encountering the invasion of the Five-Star Army, in order to protect their power, they naturally resisted with all their strength. And because of the participation of the people, the enemy was developing more and more. Fortunately, the commander of the new army, Su He, took these factors into consideration before leaving, and barely managed to maintain the situation. When the reinforcements appear, it's time to counterattack with all their strength. Compared to the stalemate in the Jiu-E prefecture, the attack in the Iwaju Island became smoother and smoother. Although the initial resistance was fierce, as the 1st Reserve Division got used to the battlefield environment and exerted all their strength, the Japanese army in the Iwaju Island, without any outside help, finally showed signs of defeat, and continued to expand. Finally, after 12 days of resistance, the main force was destroyed and the rest were captured. The flag of the Five-Star Army was planted in the Iwaju Island, which meant that the South Island had completely become an isolated city without any support. If they want to escape, they have to go through the artillery fire of the C4 Division and the C5 Division patrolling the surrounding waters. After suffering heavy losses and several consecutive attacks, they finally became well-behaved. After successfully capturing the Iwaju Island, according to the previous plan, the defense of the island was handed over to the E-1st Division. He himself took the 1st Reserve Division and a division of cavalry back to the Jiu-E prefecture by transport ship and dealt with the remaining Japanese army together with Commander Su He. Compared to the Five-Star Army, Ashikaga Yoshimasa's situation became more and more difficult. Although the opposing forces in the flat well field had gradually lost their survival space under his suppression, the sudden appearance of ninja killers still gave the Supreme General a great headache. Fortunately, with the protection of the Divine Archery Battalion, plus the protection of the always cautious guards, he didn't get killed by the ninjas, but following that, his trusted subordinates were constantly killed. In just a few days, more than a dozen of his trusted subordinates had died, and it seemed that the ninjas didn't have any intention of stopping. Yamaguchi Fukada's samurai brigade had been missing for a long time, and Ashikaga Yoshimasa had reason to suspect that they had been completely wiped out. The appearance of these ninja killers also proved his guess. This was simply a revenge and targeting method implemented by the King Wunan of Damyang. Originally, it was him who made the first move. Was there anything wrong with the other party giving him a taste of his own medicine? He just hoped that these ninjas would leave quickly so that he could restore the stability under his rule. Finally, the 20 heads of the ministers were gathered together, and the ninjas suddenly disappeared without a trace as if they had come. Ashikaga Yoshimasa felt that the wind had passed, and at the same time he ordered the army to go down north, and launched the final attack on the flat well field that had less than 10,000 soldiers. The flat well field was the minister that the emperor relied on, and he rose up after Princess Junko announced to the world that Ashikaga Yoshimasa had committed a crime. Logically speaking, even if he wasn't Yang Qindong's ally, he wouldn't be his enemy. But Yang Qindong didn't have a good impression of this person. Since you have so much power, why didn't you stand in front of the emperor earlier? If you did that, how could Ashikaga Yoshimasa be the dominant force? You didn't do that, but stood out after the death of the emperor and claimed to be righteous. This kind of person was clearly trying to take advantage of the situation. Yang Qindong didn't have the heart to pay attention to such a person, and allowed him to slowly weaken under the powerful attacks of the Grand General until he disappeared. Yang Qindong had never been interested in the internal strife of the Japanese Empire. He was constantly accumulating his strength, waiting for the grand battle with Ashikaga Yoshimasa. At that time, the entire Japanese Empire would be decided. For the sake of this day, the foreign divisions formed by the various provinces were sent to Wanation by the Navy's transport ships. The appearance of the foreign 4th Division, the foreign 5th Division, and the foreign 6th Division made the chips in Yang Qindong's hands even heavier. In the 8th month of 1458 AD, 8 months after Yang Qindong arrived in the Japanese Empire, Ashikaga Yoshimasa finally dealt with the biggest opposition to him, the flat well field, and killed him in the midst of the chaos. Then he began to mobilize his troops, looking as if he was going to head straight for Pinyin Beijing. A great battle to determine the ultimate leadership of the Japanese Empire was about to begin. After Flat Well Field was killed, the Grand General Ashikaga Yoshimasa, who had successfully taken over the Hokuriku province, quickly received a letter of surrender from the ruler of the northernmost Hokuriku province. At this point he became the new king of the Japanese Empire. If it wasn't for the sudden intervention of the 5-star army, his power would have far surpassed that of the deceased emperor. Ashikaga Yoshimasa, who had reorganized the army left behind by Hireda's death, and recruited a lot of new troops from the local area. His army had reached a total of 500,000 men, and he led his army down south, heading straight for Heian City. From his point of view, it was time to settle the grudge between him and Yang Qindong. The Awaji Island and Ji Prefecture had already been taken by Yang Qindong, and only Nankado was not in his hands. However, that didn't matter anymore. With the C4th Division and C5th Division keeping an eye on that place, and with the absolute advantage of the high-tech artillery, the other side had no chance of escaping. Without any support, and even with the supply of food and water completely cut off, how long could the 300,000 Japanese army in Nankado last? Yang Qindong was also curious. Of course, now was not the time to think about these things. The Grand General had already led the main forces to head down. How to stop the enemy's attack was the problem that needed to be considered now. There was also news from the mountain shade. The local force Sensei Naganabu that he supported had finally lost to the 100,000 elite troops of the Maori regularization. Originally, Shintinya's sudden attack, after snatching the rations of Maori Jingza's 100,000-strong army, had indeed foiled the enemy's original plan, forcing them to turn back. However, elites were elites. When the Maori regularization, with the support of the Grand General, regained the provisions, the two sides fought a bloody battle. It could not even be called a bloody battle. After a slight resistance, Fukada Tani's troops were defeated. If not for Sensei Naganabu's timely arrival, he would have died. The Maori regularization was worthy of being the Grand General's #1 fierce general. Even in the face of the joint forces of Sensei Naganabu and Fukada Tani, he did not have the slightest fear. Instead he ordered a fierce attack. In the end, after a standoff of 12 hours, Sensei Naganabu, who had allied with the Maori regularization, was disappointed to find that some of his allies had left him. The actions of his allies caused Sensei Naganabu to lose their support. In the end they had no choice but to retreat regretfully. Because of this, the Maori regularization had taken over half of the mountain shade. They had seized countless provisions and people, greatly increasing their own strength. At the same time, it had also increased the difficulty of Yang Qindong's conquest of the Japanese Empire. Outside Pinyin Beijing, the mountain shades Dambo Prefecture, the Dongshan Prefecture's Jinjiang Prefecture, and the Donghai Prefecture's Iga region were all filled with flags and military tents. From a distance, it looked like there was no end to it. It looked like they were going to rush up and tear apart Pinyin Beijing. In the palace of Pinyin Beijing, Yang Qindong was not aware that he was surrounded. On the contrary, he had a relaxed expression on his face. At this moment he was looking at the subordinates who had followed him. The 1st Cavalry Division's commander Tian Hu, the 4th Army Division's commander Ling Daqiang, the 7th Army's commander Tian Su, the new Army's commander Su He, the 1st Reserve Division's commander Su Da, as well as the 2nd, 3rd, 4th, 5th and 6th Division's commanders were all present. Behind them were the 5-star Army's 220,000 soldiers. Compared to Ashikaga Yoshimasa's 600,000 soldiers, this was a small number. However, compared to the 5-star army, this was already a considerable force. Chapter 11:16. Apart from a few foreign tribes, the rest were all elite soldiers who had been through hundreds of battles. Among them were the Lung Feng Division, the Lu 4th Division, and the Lu 7th Division, who were all armed with firearms. And all these people were gathered together just to defend the peace capital, so Yang Qindong really didn't feel any pressure. Of course, if it was just to defend the city, these troops were naturally enough. But Yang Qindong didn't just want that. He wanted to conquer the entire Japanese empire. Especially when Baiming boasted of its wings and gradually began to show its fangs, the pressure on the new First Army and the new Second Army on the grassland was increasing day by day. If the problem couldn't be solved, unpredictable things would happen at any time. Baiming's development over the years, especially since the mobilization of the entire army, had risen to 4 million troops. Just this huge number alone was enough to have a deterrent effect. Against them, even Yang Qindong didn't have the confidence to win. Ants could bite an elephant to death. It wasn't just a saying. Therefore, in the eyes of others, Yang Qindong, who should be defending Ping and Beijing, had decided to launch a counterattack. He wanted to eliminate the main force of Ashikaga Yoshimasa, so as to quickly get out of the quagmire of war in the Japanese Empire. The war in the Japanese Empire had been going on for 8 months. Compared to taking down the Golden Border Dynasty in 30 days and taking down the other Southeast Asian countries in 2 or 3 months, the delay here was really too long. The longer the war dragged on, the greater the investment, and the greater the pressure on money and food. This was naturally not a good thing for Yang Xie, who was still in the development period. Even if it was to solve the pressure in other aspects, the war here should be over. The people present at the meeting were all the troops Yang Qindong had to attack the Japanese Empire. Yes, at this moment he couldn't find any more reinforcements. Although the 5-star army was strong and had developed over the years, their military strength wasn't too little. However, they had occupied too much territory and there were too many places that needed to be guarded. These 200,000 plus soldiers were already the majority of Yang Qindong's mobile forces. When Yang Qindong's gaze landed on the generals, everyone's gaze also converged on him. Upon closer inspection, one could see that their breathing was slightly rapid. Clearly, they had also guessed the theme of this meeting. They knew that the war was about to begin, and that the time to make a great contribution had come. Compared to the nervousness in the hearts of the generals, Yang Qindong was extremely relaxed. The reason why he made this decision was because of Detsong. Yang Xie's growth today was all thanks to Okura. From small daily necessities to big guns and cannons, Yang Xie earned a lot of money and expanded his power. Advanced technology and weapons that were hundreds of years old were the key for Yang Qindong to become stronger and achieve his great goals. This time, with 200,000 plus soldiers against 600,000, Yang Qindong also had to rely on Okura's strength. A completely feasible plan was already in his mind. Now, all he had to do was to realize it and set the foundation for conquering the entire Japanese Empire. Are you all very excited? After a moment of silence, Yang Qindong's voice finally rang out. When it reached the ears of the generals, they couldn't help but laugh. Yes, this is indeed a good time for you to make a contribution. This battle will also be our victory, a moment that will forever be remembered in history. Is everyone ready? When Yang Qindong's voice resounded through the entire imperial palace, all the generals replied in unison, "Be ready at all times." Very good. Satisfied with everyone's answer, Yang Qindong once again said in a clear voice, "Generals, listen up." At the same time, in the Japanese army's camp, Ashikaga Yoshimasa was also holding a military meeting. Many of his subordinates stood on both sides, waiting for the general to make a strategic decision. Their military strength was almost 3 times that of the 5-star armies. They were also very familiar with the terrain and had the support of millions of Japanese Empire citizens. Ashikaga Yoshimasa couldn't see any possibility of failure. At one point, he even thought that the 5-star army was able to conquer Ping and Beijing because they took advantage of a loophole. If it wasn't for the internal strife that was too serious, how could the 5-star army achieve such results? Yes, the 5-star army had powerful firearms and their power was very great. However, when facing the charge of hundreds of thousands of soldiers, firearms could only play a supporting role. In the end, it still depended on the strength of the soldiers. Otherwise, there wouldn't be a history of small guns and rifles defeating cannons and machine guns. Besides, the Japanese Empire didn't have any firearms at all. They also had some ordinary red coat cannons, about 100 of them. These were the ones that Ashikaga Yoshimasa took the initiative to submit to Baiming's emperor, Zhu Qiu, and were transported by sea. As for ordinary firearms, they also had about 5,000 of them. Although they were far inferior to Lung Feng's Type 95 and Type 81 rifles, they could still fire up to a few hundred meters away, which could boost the morale of the soldiers. The most important thing was that they had enough military strength and the support of the citizens. This was also where the general's confidence came from. Other than the Northern Land Road, which was affected by the war, the grain fields of Donghai Road, especially the Dongshan Road, which was the largest area, were almost unaffected. With enough food, even if they faced the 5-star army for a few years, they could still hold on. Compared to the 5-star army, who had to rely on sea transportation for all their food and drink, they already had a natural advantage. With such confidence, Ashikaga Yoshimasa, who was sitting at the head of the table, had a smile on his face throughout the meeting. In the end, after everyone's discussion, they came up with a final battle plan, which was to use a protracted war, using attrition as the main strategy. In the end, they would force the 5-star army to retreat from the Japanese Empire and achieve their goal of independence. Doesn't the 5-star army have cannons? Moreover, they can fire up to a distance of 13 miles. Good, then our general's tent will be 13 miles away, maintaining a safe distance from you. As long as the general is fine, the front line won't collapse. They wanted to see how many cannons the 5-star army had, how many cannons they had, how many cannons they had, and how many cannons they had. Just from this point alone, Ashikaga Yoshimasa's mind was still very clear. At least he didn't choose to attack Ping and Beijing. Otherwise, with a strong city and powerful cannons, he would be the one at a disadvantage. However, if it was a confrontation, then it would be completely different. Especially since Beiming had sent news that they were about to encircle and annihilate the 5-star army on the grasslands. As long as they could hold the 5-star army's main force here, once the grasslands fell, their minds would be in chaos. At that time, it would be time for them to retreat without fighting. With the help of their allies, they only needed to continue the confrontation. Holding the 5-star army's main force would be a great achievement. What was there to be afraid of? After the meeting, the generals returned to their respective camps. A large net was spread out, and it was as if they were in a confrontation. At the same time, all the generals' tents were moved to a place 15 miles away from Ping and Beijing to ensure that nothing would go wrong. The movements of the Japanese army were collected by the intelligence department and sent to Yang Qindong. Looking at the result that was as he expected, Yang Qindong only sneered. In his heart he thought, "Who told you that the 5-star army's cannons can only fire up to a range of 13 miles? The so-called 100mm mortar was only used by the Cold Vanguard army because it was convenient to carry around. In the warehouse, who knew how many powerful cannons were not taken out? For example, the Type 86 122mm howitzer. The Type 86 122mm howitzer was based on the Soviet Union's D-30 122mm howitzer. According to the needs of modern warfare, the Type 86 122mm howitzer was developed in 1985 to replace the old Type 54 and 54-1 or 122mm howitzer. The Type 86 122mm howitzer's barrel was longer, and it was 30 times the caliber. It weighed 3.2 tons and had a firing rate of 6 to 8 rounds per minute. It had a 360 degrees firing range. It could use anti-personnel grenades, armor-piercing bullets, extended-range bullets, smoke bombs, flares, anti-armor shrapnel and many other types of ammunition. The range of normal shells was 18 kilometers, and the range of concave extended-range bullets was 21 kilometers. The Type 86 used anti-armor shrapnel that contained 30 bullets. It had an armor-piercing thickness of 500 millimeters and a maximum range of 15 kilometers. Compared to other types of howitzers, the Type W86 structure was compact, easy to operate, long range, high accuracy, simple manufacturing, and low cost. It could be said that it caught up with the world's advanced standards. Especially the Type 80 SIX's 360 degrees firing range and long range, it was second to none in the world. The range of the Type W86 was 15 kilometers, which was twice the range of the 100mm howitzer. Could definitely catch the enemy off guard. In Ping and Beijing's national treasury, there was a 122mm howitzer. As to when it appeared and why it appeared, no one knew. However, they knew that it was very powerful. At this point, it had to be said that Yang Qindong had set up a persona for himself. He rarely explained anything that was taken out of the warehouse. At first, some people were curious about where the things came from. Beta Persei had also made mistakes in this regard. He even chased after Yang Qindong for an answer. The answer was that he did not get any answer and was even arranged to train in the army. This scared Beta Persei. He was not afraid of hardships as a soldier, but he was afraid that he would lose his identity as a Yang family servant. After training for a while, he returned to Yang Qindong's side and kept his mouth shut. He knew what to ask and what not to ask. Even Beta Persei was like this. It could be imagined that other people would not dare to ask so many questions. Because of this, Yang Qindong became even more mysterious. When the 122mm howitzer appeared in front of several generals, they were inevitably shocked. Some of them had heard some news that there were some powerful cannons being developed in the arsenal of Chichen City, but no one had seen what it looked like. Now that they finally had the opportunity to feast their eyes, they were naturally surprised and excited. You're tuning in to the Han Li's Wuxia Chronicles YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.